It was already evening outside and there was a full moon in the sky, which was above a tall building. This was the 7th area of the market. The black cat stood looking ahead, hands in his pockets. He stood for a long time looking thoughtfully out of the window. After he hesitated, a system message appeared in front of him. Constellation asked when the ring would arrive. Black Cat extended his hand in front of the system message and told Constellation that she was already on her way. The black cat said that she would go through the usual procedures and come through the portal. After the system message started repeating the same message. Constellation was saying that they were crazy. The black cat stood and watched it all. He didn't understand what was happening. He held the fist up to his head and thought that he had researched whether it was an artifact from the Age of Destruction at the request of the former black cat, but this was the first time he had seen such a reaction. Black Cat looked to the side and was surprised when she saw something shining on the table. The whole thing was lying on the table and blue particles were coming from it. The black cat came up to her and told her that she was finally here, and if he gave them this, he hoped they would be much quieter. He picked up the ring box. The ring was filled with mana and radiated it from itself. He took the ring in his hands and told Constellation that he had the ring. He thought about it and called out to Constellation once more. Constellation said it was, but after starting to repeat this phrase a lot of times, the black cat stood there and was surprised. After that, we are transported to Suwon Kim, who was standing in front of Disir. I looked at him and asked him who he was. Disir asked with a smile on his face if he was sure he wanted to know who he was. Kim was silent for a moment, then he put his hand to the basin and assumed that it wanted something from him. Disir kept her hands in her pockets and said that he was absolutely right, otherwise why would he have had to look for Kim on this remote mountain peak? Kim looked at him and said he'd guess what he was up to. Afterward, he said that he wanted to get rid of it. Disir glared at him and said that he had a good sense of smell. Kim took off his briefcase and said with his eyes closed that it wasn't his gut feeling at all. Disir looked at Kim in surprise. He took off his briefcase and threw it on the ground. He said that anyone would know as soon as they saw him. Kim took off the hood with a smile, saying that he had seen it a few days ago. Disir's expression changed and he stretched out his hands and said he was a fool. Afterward, he clenched his hands and said that for someone ranked #1 in Valhalla, he seemed like a very stupid guy. After that, he ran away and was about to swing to make a punch. Disir told him not to disappoint him. Disir, completely engrossed in rage, started swinging to strike. He threw his punch, but Kim easily sidestepped and watched as Disir's punch headed towards the tree. Disir left a huge crack in the tree and looked to the side. Disir withdrew his fist and looked at Kim with a smile. The tree at this point just fell to the floor. He held up his hand and said that he was lucky to have been able to dodge that blow, and if he hadn't, he would have been finished long ago. Kim looked at him with a smile and asked about his luck. Afterward, he said that he dodged it because it was too slow. Then he looked down and thought. He looked at the tree that was broken and said that he was definitely strong, and in terms of strength, he was about as strong as Seniac, and maybe even stronger. Looked at him and realized that it was still dangerous for him to stop such a strike with his fragile body. Then he smiled and realized that, and so yes, he had a very simple strategy. After that, he immediately turned to the side and started running away. Disir, a surprised look for this situation, did not understand what's going on here. After that, he looked in his direction with a smile and realized that he had decided to run away. Disir watched Kim run away and said that it was a good decision for someone in his position, because otherwise he would have been beaten to death if he didn't do something. After that, he started swinging his arm and said with a smile that Disir wouldn't just let him leave. After that, unexpectedly for Disir, Kim abruptly stopped and turned to the side with a smile, waving his hand. I asked him if he didn't use his brain at all. Disir stood there in shock and watched as Kim's fist was aimed at his face. Disir couldn't figure out when the man had gotten so close to him, because he didn't even notice his fist coming at him until it was right in front of his eyes. After that, a powerful punch landed in Disir's face. The impact was so strong that Disir was thrown out of the way for a good distance. He squeezed his eyes shut and fell to the floor. Then he opened his eyes and was surprised to see an enraged Kim standing in front of him, smiling as he raised his leg to finish him off. Kim was already kicking out with his foot, but Disir turned away with a grunt of pain. As a result, Kim's powerful kick landed squarely on the ground with Disir sitting next to his leg and looking at his leg. Kim told him to look at it. He looked ahead with a smile and said that Disir was very lucky that he was able to dodge this blow. Kim completely repeated the words that Disir had said to him recently. Disir was very angry at this and said that he was a fool. Then he stood up, adjusting his face, and asked Kim what he had done. Kim looked at him with a smile and asked if he didn't know. Said she assumed that Disir knew that Kim was ranked #1 in Valhalla. Disir stood silently with a bruised face and pondered. Disir kept saying Kim's name in her head. Disir didn't understand what it took for Kim to become so strong. After that, we see Desira's memories. There was a huge house. It was the home of the Ventric family, Desira. She was drinking liquids from different bottles. The adults were standing at the back and watching. Desira recalled how they used his talent to raise their status, even just a little. His talent lay in his innate penchant for the elixirs he drank. Desira took various elixirs and understood that he could drink any elixir that was given to him. His parents gave him elixirs worth hundreds of millions of dollars a bottle. After that, the water bottle shattered and Desira stood watching his body. The parents were standing in the back and were surprised by the effect. Desira at the age of 16 became stronger than an adult. From this, his parents wanted to use him to gain recognition in their family. Desira turned to look at his parents and began to smile maliciously. Desira recalled that he did not want to live his entire life under the control of his parents. The parents were shocked by this, after which Desira beat up his parents and stood over them with his hand clenched into a fist and a big smile on his face. Desira had overwhelming power, so I didn't care about my family's recognition at all. Then we see Adelia Ventric. Desira recalled how he was still a thorn in their lives. He was also kicked out by another woman who considered herself the head of this family. Desira said with a malicious smile that he didn't care about it, and in this dark world, most of his problems were solved with money. He recalled being much bolder after his ties with his family were severed. I remembered sitting across from Rockdale, and when he made a request to him, he also offered money, but his interest in Kim was much stronger. Afterward, he walked down the street and thought about it. Desira hauled that Kim won first place in the Valhalla entrance exam. He also heard that he was a madman who used profanity to kick out all the guild guides. He was walking down the street and smiling. Desira was very interested in how much fun it would be to play with this guy, and he really wanted to have some fun with them. But I was in front of him completely scared and beaten. He didn't understand who Kim was. Kim stood in front of Desira with his hands in his pockets. After Kim was called out, he looked ahead and asked Desira, wiping his eyes, what substances Kim was taking to become so strong. Desira said that he didn't think there were any cheap elixirs that could help an orphan like Kim. Kim looked at him with a smile and asked what he was talking about. Afterward, he started laughing out loud at the fact that Desira really thought he was using substances. Kim started to wipe his eyes and said something that Desira was a fool after he asked if he was really telling the truth. Desira stood there with an angry expression on his face as Kim realized that Desira was only so strong because of the third-party substances he used as a child. Desira was standing in front of Takimwa, trembling. He was shocked that Kim had actually become so strong without the help of elixirs. Kim started to adjust his arm and said that he had become like this by himself without the help of elixirs and thanks to his training. He looked ahead with a smile and said that he wanted to compare Desira with Seniak. Desira started to tremble and get very angry at the words Kim said. Kim said they thought it would be rude to compare a naturally muscular guy like Seniak to someone as pathetic as Desira. Desira glared at him, and in her mind's eye, she thought that he would kill the bastard. He started to draw his sword, which was on his back, and Kim noticed. Desira understood that he didn't have permission to use this weapon here, but he had no choice. After that, he took out a blade that radiated a dark purple malevolent aura. Kim looked at it with a serious face and realized what kind of magic power it was. Desira grabbed his weapon and said that he was feeling great and his strength was growing very fast. He looked in Kim's direction with a smile and called out his name. Kim immediately got close to him and started swinging his leg. Desira asked if he really thought he would let him go so easily. He didn't notice at all when Kim came up to him and he kicked him in the face. Kim looked at him with a smile and asked was he really a fool or was he just pretending. Desira flew a good distance away and Kim asked why he always talked so much before attacking his opponent. Desira slammed into a nearby tree and Kim immediately closed the distance with him and started swinging his arm to hit Desira again. Kim hit Desira with such force that the tree trunk completely broke and Desira lost consciousness from the impact. Then Kim held out his hand and shouted for him to stand still. He grabbed Desira by the hair, and Desira grunted in pain. Kim squatted down in front of Desira, and he said that the one who drinks the elixir can't die yet. He held his hair with a smile and said that he would forgive him if he did bad things only to him. But Desira himself said that he was going to get rid of Kim, so he also hurt other people. So he can't just let him go from here. He looked at him and said that he wanted to ask Desira something anyway. After that, he clenched his two hands into a fist and said what Desira should say while gritting his teeth. After that, he started swinging to hit him. Desira was startled and shouted at him to wait and not hurry with his actions. After that, we are transported to Rockdale. He was sitting on the couch, and Yuria was standing behind him. Rockdale held his hands to his chin and considered. He thought that Desira should have taken care of Kim long ago. Given his temper, he assumed that Desira had killed him. He glared viciously ahead and knew that cleaning up after him was very painful, but at least it wasn't on academy grounds. Rockdale hadn't expected him to go out at such a beautiful time, so it was a real relief for him. Then he put his hand on the sofa and called out to Yuri. He told her to get the car ready. Yuria said that she would do everything he said. After which, Rockdale was surprised and looked away. His phone vibrated and his expression changed as it was a call from Desira. He answered the phone and held it to his ear. He asked if Desira had taken care of Kim, but no one answered the phone. I called out to Desira once more, and then Desira's moans were heard on the phone. Rockdale was shocked when she heard this. Rockdale was very scared when Kim said that he could bet that Rockdale knew what was going on between them right now. Rockdale immediately recognized the voice. Kim was sitting next to Desira, who was moaning in pain. Kim held the phone to his ear and said that if he tried to translate what his brother said, if he died, he would burn 2 incense sticks for him. Rockdale was very scared by this, and Kim then told Rockdale to wait for him. Kim was on the phone and called out to Rockdale. Then he heard a beep and looked at his phone. Kim realized that the fool had picked up and hung up. He said it was very rude after he looked ahead and wondered what he should have done with Desira. He stood up and looked at the battered Desira who was sitting near the tree. Then we see the tea being poured into a mug. It was Yuria. She held the cup up to Rockdale and told him that his tea was ready. Rockdale was sitting on the couch, idly washing his hands. Yuria also said that the tea was ready, but before she finished, Rockdale told her to shut up and told her to leave him and get out of the room. Yuria put the tea on the table and left with her eyes closed. Rockdale sat back and was dissatisfied. He kept saying Kim Rock's name in his head and didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to get rid of Kim. He looked ahead and said that now he knew for sure that he was the one behind all this. Rockdale said that Desira had ruined everything. Rockdale put his hands to his head and knew that at this rate, it was only a matter of time before the news reached the Ventric family and the situation was completely out of control. He held his hands to his head and thought. He knew that on the other hand, it might not be so bad. He sat on the couch and assumed that he was an orphan, which meant that he wouldn't be able to get to him. But Rockdale knew that just in case, he shouldn't talk about it for a while, he just had to stay and watch it. Kim walked through the woods with his hands in his pockets. Barch asked if he was serious about just leaving Desira lying next to the tree. I told him that when the time came, he would report it, but in the meantime, he wouldn't do anything about it. Barch idly asked if he couldn't just kill him. Kim, looking ahead, said that if it was in the past, he would have done it, but at the moment, he would be in trouble for it, because now he is not Kim Hyano, but a high school student named Kim Ju Hyuk. Barch said it was definitely like him. Barch offered his hand to his chin and said there was something he was worried about. I asked him what he meant by that. Barch said that he was talking about the magic that Desira had triggered earlier when he took out his weapon. Barch said that this magic was very familiar to him. Kim, hands in his pockets, asked what he meant. Barch said that if he released more magic, he would be able to confirm it with 100% probability, but he had definitely sensed similar magic before. As Kim walked forward, Barch asked Kim if he felt anything special then. Everything you meant by special. Kim said that 300 years ago, monsters sacrificed dog cows to use this kind of black magic. Kim asked if he was speaking correctly. Barch said that he believed Kim was not so adept at distinguishing people by their magic. Barch said it was a more subtle skill to think about. Kim was clearly angry at this and told Barch to shut up. Barch stood idly by, and Kim assumed that the hidden side of the blade that the guy was talking about was related to this power. Barch said it really could have happened. Kim then looked ahead and asked Desira, who was unconscious, who told him to find him. Then he became what he was, throwing his arm behind his head and forgetting that he had dislocated Desira's jaw. Then he put his finger in his mouth and told him that it might hurt a little. Then he set Desira's jaw. Kim stood in front of him, eyes closed, while Desira began to adjust his jaw. Kim asked him who told him to do it. Desira looked down in silence, and Kim looked at him while exhaling. Tim took his hand and looked at it. Kim said that he corrected his cello so that he could answer him. Afterward, he grabbed Desira's fingers with a vicious face and asked if Desira really thought he could just keep quiet. Desira looked down at his hand in fright and asked what he meant, then he asked why Kim was holding his fingers. After that, Kim waved his hand with a malicious smile and Desira began to cry out in pain while looking at his fingers. Kim broke his fingers to let you know he wasn't joking. Kim looked at the trembling Desira, who was holding onto his fingers. Kim called him a fool and told Desira to tell him everything he knew, otherwise he would break all his other fingers. Desira looked at Kim with a smile and said it was Rockdale Ventric. Kim looking ahead, he was wondering if this was the guy who molested him the last time. Kim pointed his index finger at Desira and asked who he was. He asked if he came here at the request of that brat. Kim said that he didn't look like a Valhalla disciple at all, so he asked where Desira was from. Desira looked at him with a smile and asked if Kim really asked him about it. He said he might not like what the Kims heard. Kim started picking at his ear and asked what he was talking about. Kim asked if he wanted him to break more of his fingers. Desira looked down and said that he was a Desira of the first kind. Desira said that he was taking on a lot of errands as a mercenary. Kim looked at him and said that he had heard of the first species somewhere before. He asked if it was really fun to be a mercenary. Kim said it was just a pathetic hooligan who got paid to do it. Desira looked at him with a smile and asked if they really all seemed like trash to him. Desira said Kim was just a lucky guy. Desira hold your fingers said that the constellation that the first species worshipped was the hidden side of the blade. Desira said that of course he was also someone who was bound by a contract with Constellation. Desira looked at him with a smile and said that if he had had more time to prepare, the results of this fight would have been completely different and he would have defeated Kim. Kim started fixing his hair with a smile and said that he was a fool. He asked if Desira really liked to talk. Kim said he would have left him alone if he had shut up and told him who he was involved with. After that, he stuck his finger in his mouth and said that he should shut up. After that, he glared at him and broke his jaw, causing terrifying screams to be heard. Then we flash back to the city and see Kim flipping through his messages on his phone. It said who the first species were, if they had heard of them, and if anyone wanted to meet them. The first species was a group of evil people who worshipped the hidden side of the blade. Kim was wearing a hood while looking at his phone and said that as he expected, everyone agreed that they were just another evil group. Kim, looking at his phone, said that in any case, he was very upset and annoyed that he couldn't find his notes and that fool named Rockdale was still giving him problems. Kim looked up and thought about Rockdale. Kim was thinking about how to get rid of it. After that, he started typing something on his phone and said that in their time, he needed to use modern methods. He opened the recorder and said that, first, he had recorded all of Desira's confessions. The phone had 2 entries for 15 and 12 minutes. Kim looked away and thought about how he just needed to upload it somewhere on the internet. After starting this phone call, Kim rang. Lilia was working on a tablet when she heard her phone start vibrating. She picked up the phone with a smile and called out to Kim. She asked if he was really willing to start working with her and become her assistant. Kim smiled and said that he didn't agree. After he asked, did she happen to know any news reporters? Then we see the news. The news had reported an assassination attempt on Valhalla students by the Ventric family. Last Thursday, a first-year Valhalla Academy student who was on a walk was attacked by a villain. Later it turned out that student was able to fight back and beat up the criminal and pass on all this information that is in the article. People say that student immediately informed the Valhalla instructor about the incident, and that he had all the evidence recorded on a dictaphone, which he handed over to the organization. The article included photos of the Valhalla Academy and how Desira was taken into custody. The person who posted the article wrote that it clears up the confusion surrounding the attack by a member of the Ventric family, but a student at Valhalla Academy. Last Thursday, a Year 1 student at Valhalla Academy who was on a walk after midterm exams was attacked by a villain who was a member of an evil group. Second, but the funny thing was that the student who was attacked by the villain actually beat him up and managed to get some information out of him. The third student asked the instructor to be paid and passed the villain to Valhalla, plus the freshman recorded the villain's guilty plea when he extracted all the information from him. Fourth, the recordings contained the villain's confession that Rockdale Ventric, the son of the Ventric family and also a Valhalla student, had instigated the entire attack on the freshman. Fifth, the Ventric family was now struggling to make an official statement. People in the comments suggested that the student who managed to defeat the attacker was Kim. Other students said that this information had already spread. Someone wrote that it was a hell of a lot of fun and these fools were being scolded by Valhalla students right now. Many students agreed with this, but it wasn't too sloppy. Someone wrote that this fool Ventric was under the protection of his family, and of course it was sloppy work. He laughed at it and said it was a stupid idea that he really had a chance against the student. Kim looked at it all with a smile and said that this was what modern warfare looked like. Kim had his feet up on the table and was reading the comments. Barch said that for a man who lived 300 years ago, he was very well adapted to the current conditions and technologies. He said that he really had a hard time following his reincarnation. Kim said that he mostly focused on getting used to everything by watching the news and other news. He was sitting at his computer desk, looking at his phone. Kim said that because of this, he was able to become who he really is now. Barch said that it completely raises it. Kim looked ahead and said what a pity. Barch didn't understand and asked him what he meant. Kim Lista News said that he only tried to frame Rockdale, but all the journalists rushed to publish it and completely ruined the reputation of the Ventric family. Barch thought about it. Kim looked at his phone and said that in any case, the reporter Lilia introduced him to was a very important person. Kim said he didn't know the story would get such a response. After that, we see a stand with a microphone. It was an announcement about the position of the Ventric family. Adelia came in afterward. She lowered her head as she started to speak. Adelia said that first of all, she would very much like to express her most sincere apologies to the students of Valhalla Academy who were attacked. She said the following statement was in line with the Ventric family's official position on the matter. Adelia said that the attack was primarily carried out by Desira, who was exiled from the Ventric family. Adelia said that Desira's confession, which the victim claims was recorded saying that it was all Rockdale Ventric who gave the order. However, Desira later testified that this was a blatant lie, just an attempt to avoid the predicament he found himself in at the time. Consequently, they believed that the Ventric family had no role in the incident. Adelia took the paper and said that although he had been exiled, he had once belonged to the Ventric family, and therefore they felt it was their moral duty to make amends. Adelia said that as the head of the Ventric family, she was going to personally visit the victim to apologize to her for everything that was going on, and as for Rockdale Ventric, who was currently attending Valhalla Academy, even if he wasn't involved in the crime, they all assumed that he might still be otherwise connected to the perpetrator. Adelia said they would call him home for an intensive internal investigation. She said that an investigation into the family was also planned, which is why they will work hard to make sure that they don't have any doubts, as well as other people. Adelia lowered her head and walked away. The reporters were surprised that she wasn't going to answer their questions. The journalist was wondering what kind of apology Adelia would bring to the victim. Rockdale held the phone, his body still shaking. He watched Adelia's performance and was completely terrified by it. Then his phone vibrated and his father called him. Rockdale answered the call and held the phone to his ear. On the phone, my father told Rockdale to get back to England immediately, and that was an order. Rockdale looked ahead and said he understood. Rockdale looked down, her body still shaking. Uriah looked down and saw Rockdale resenting everything that was happening. The next day, we are transported to the Valhalla Academy. Someone was holding a phone and watching a video that had already received 2 million views. What Desira was saying was that the Ventric family was completely right, and he was the only culprit. Kim was walking down the street and watching this video. He didn't know what the hell was going on. Kim assumed that he was suppressing all his pride. Kim walked forward and realized that the Ventric family were still those fools. Kim said she just couldn't stand them. He closed his eyes and shoved his hands in his pockets. He said that in any case, they said they would come and apologize to him themselves. Kim said it would be rather awkward. Then he looked to the side and saw the staff room. He looked over and said that classes were already over. He wondered if he should have reached out to this person. After that, we are transported to the cafe of Valhalla. We see a smiling Lily opposite Kim, who was drinking a drink and saying that he would not become her assistant. Lilia got up from the table and asked why her daughter, then asked if he knew what she was going to tell him. Kim said that she was going to ask her to become his assistant, but it wasn't obvious enough. Lilia sat down to look at the side with her hands folded and asked why Im called her then. Despite the fact that she is quite a busy person, she still had a lot of unfinished business. Then she got up from the table again and wondered if it could have been a date. Kim looked at her and told her to wake up from her dream. Lilia looked at him with displeasure and asked if he really wanted her to wake up. Then she asked him why he was talking to her so informally. Kim looked at her and said that they had been talking like this for a while. Lilia noticed it too. Kim closed her eyes and said that in any case, he called her not because he was just bored, but because he wanted to thank her for introducing him to a reporter who was quite an important person. Lilia stood up with a smile and Tim said that he would give her some information on how to fight monsters. Lilia asked if you would really tell me. Kim looked at him and said that since he was going to tell her, he asked her to help him leave the academy this weekend. Lilia was sitting with a hot drink and said it was very easy. Outside, the sunset could be seen, illuminating the Valhalla Academy. Lilia said that if Kim became her assistant, she would let him leave every day. Kim said he didn't need it, then thanked her. After that, we are transported to the North Pacific Ocean. There was a prisoner transport called Al-8 passing by. There was Desira behind bars on board. He was very angry and didn't expect to be put on a ship and treated like cargo. He couldn't believe that he was being transferred to the prison tower. After that, we see a prison tower in the North Pacific Ocean. There was a full moon and lightning could be seen in the prison tower. The S-class constellation itself created this shelter of loss. This is a prison that turned all contractors into ordinary people who sat there and suffered. Desira sat there with a smile and thought that it didn't matter because all he had to do was shut up and make sure that Rockdale could stay in the Ventric family. And if he did, they would reduce his sentence to 5 years, otherwise it would be a very huge disaster. Desira about this and understood that 5 years is not what. Then he heard a voice saying that he had an ugly face. Desira turned around and didn't understand what it was. Then there was a wave, and someone was holding the dagger that had cut Desira's throat, causing blood to spray everywhere. Desira was shocked. Blood began to run down his clothes. He turned his head and saw a dark silhouette holding a knife in his hand. A dark silhouette with red eyes told Desira to die and called him a fool. He said that one mind didn't need a guy like him. Desira began to choke, bleeding profusely. Then he fell, and his head hit the ground, spattering blood everywhere. The dark silhouette of a man watched in silence as he collapsed. After that, we are transported to the Ventric family mansion. Adelia sat looking ahead at Rockdale and Rockdale's father. My father's name was Eden Ventric. They both bowed to her. Adelia looked ahead and called out to Rockdeal. Rockdeal answered in a startled voice. Adelia sat at the table and asked him what he was going to do. Rockdeal asked her what she meant, and then he apologized and bowed deeply. Adelia looked at him and asked that was all he wanted to say. Adelia asked if these changes were supposed to fix something in this situation. Rockdeal continued to stare at the floor in silence. Adelia looked at him with a serious face and told him to tell her everything in detail that made him do such a thing. Rockdeal agreed, and Adelia asked if he wanted to take care of Kim. Rockdeal looked down and said that it was just like that. Adelia clenched her hand into a fist and the atmosphere in the room changed and her hair began to rise up, as if something very frightening was looking at Rockdeal and his father. She asked was this really the explanation she wanted to hear. She might have stood up and said that Rockdeal was acting on his own because he thought Kim had offended the Ventric family, but it was really his own pride. Adelia asked Rockdeal if she had spoken correctly. She approached Rockdeal, who had been bowing all this time, and said that, in addition, as a result of this, it was he who caused the Ventric family to be completely defamed. She was leaning over him, giving off a malevolent aura. She asked Rockdeal what they were supposed to do. Rockdeal looked down in fear, and then he fell to his knees and began to bow low. He said that he would do absolutely everything to restore the violated honor of their common family. Adelia looked at him and asked what he was talking about. Rockdeal listened to all that Adelia was saying, frightened. Adelia said the only way to restore the family's honor was to excommunicate him from the church. My father looked up and asked if the punishment for such a misdemeanor was too severe. Adelia looked at him and asked if he wanted to be expelled along with Rockdeal. My father looked down and said nothing. Adelia stood over the shivering Rockdeal, who was on his knees, and began to think. She would have preferred to have him killed right now in front of her, but then it would have been known for certain that Rockdeal was the one who ordered Desir to kill Kim. Adelia glared ahead and considered. She called out to the terrified Rockdeal and told him that she would not expel him for the time being, and then she told him to go back to Valhalla and keep his mouth shut. She looked at him with a serious look and said that after she met Kim, she would still think carefully again before passing a verdict. Rockdeal was on his knees thanking Adelia. Then we see the ventricle building and Adelia tells them to get out of here. Rockdeal and his father headed down the corridor. My father turned to Rockdeal Poyle and said that from now on, he must be extremely quiet and not do anything rash. Rockdeal looked ahead and called out to his father. She asked if he had heard what the head of the family had said. He looked ahead and said that sooner or later he would be excommunicated from the church, but the media was now closely monitoring his name, so there was nothing he could do about it. He continued walking with his father and said that when things settled down, he would do something that no one expected. He glared angrily ahead and said that he needed to finish the rest of his business, and this situation was slowing him down a lot just now. The father silently looked in his son's direction and Rockdeal said that the father should have helped him. They were walking down the corridor together, and my father said that Rockdeal should have kept it a secret. Rockdeal knew that very well. After that, we are transported a few weeks ahead to the Valhalla Academy building. We see the interrogation room where Ligon was sitting with his hands under his head. He said that the head of the Ventric family was coming here soon because she wanted to apologize to Kim. Kim sat across from him with his hands in his pockets and said that he had nothing to do with the head of the family. Kim said that she even stated that the incident had nothing to do with the family. Ligon held out his hand and said that she did it, but still decided to apologize to him because of this. She even came to Korea. Kim looked ahead and thought. He understood that the Ventric family wanted to avoid Rockdeal's punishment. Kim wondered if Adelia wanted to meet him because she had no other choice. Kim closed her eyes and realized with a grudging face that it really annoyed him. Ligon folded his hands in front of him and said that he and instructor Lee Sangcheol were also very upset about the whole situation. Ligon looked at Kim and said that following the order of events, the Valhalla student was attacked first. The assailant then confessed that he was ordered to do it by Rockdeal. Ligon closed his eyes, holding his hands in front of him, and said that he couldn't believe that they were actually trying to protect their family's reputation by belittling Kim's recorded confession. In any case, he said they were busy trying to hide the truth from other people. Ligon said that to protect their students, they should have expelled Rockdeal, but not so long ago, the Ventric family donated a huge amount of money. Ligon looked at Kim and said that he couldn't believe that most of Valhalla's funding came from donations from large families, and the academy would probably turn a blind eye if they were given a large enough amount of money. Kim looked at him picking at his ear and said he understood. Kim said that he would talk to this so-called head of the family. Ligon looked at him in surprise and asked why he had such a normal reaction. Kim sat there and didn't understand what he was talking about. He told him that he had always been normal. Then someone knocked on the door. Ligon looked at the door and said that she had come and he was looking for her now. He got up from the couch and looked at Kim, who had his hands in his pockets. Ligon said that he would go, and then he wished them a pleasant chat. Then the head of the Ventric family, Adelia Ventric, came into the office. Ligon bowed to her and left the office. He told her that you might not be in a hurry. Adelia thanked him for his hospitality, then walked over to Kim, who was sitting on the couch. She called out to Kim and said it was nice to meet him, and then she said that she was the head of the Ventric family. Kim got up from the couch and said it was nice to meet him too. Adelia was sitting on the couch with her hands folded together. Kim sat across from her and looked at her with his hands in his pockets. Adelia looked at him and said that first of all, as far as the attack on Kim that Desira had committed was concerned, she deeply apologized for it. After which, she stood in front of Kim and bowed deeply. Who he became and said they'd sort it out, so it wasn't important to him. Adelia said that she had also heard that Rockdale was causing trouble. Kim Stahl said it was only one time, so it also made absolutely no difference. Adelia looked at him and listened intently. Kim said that he had been told that Rockdale had absolutely nothing to do with the incident, but since they had announced it, he had nothing more to say. Adelia was surprised, then said that she really needed to talk to Kim about it. She said they made an official statement shortly after the attack on him, but they were in a situation where neither the media nor the citizens believed it. He began to pick his ear with his finger. He asked Adelia what they expected from this. He thought for a moment, as if everything she said was true, then thought that they were fools. Adelia looked at him with a smile and said that by telling Kim all this, she would also like to create an opportunity to resolve this misunderstanding. Tam watched her and listened to what she said. Adelia said Kim could help them. Kim looked at Adelia and said he wouldn't help them. Adelia closed her eyes and said with a smile on her face that she expected Kim to say that. What Adelia said was that if Kim helped them this time, she promised to give him her full support until he graduated from the academy. Adelia spread her hands and said that of course she could even recommend him to the guild that sponsors them, the Ventric family, so that they can continue to help him even after graduating from the academy, but she will help him become a better hunter sooner. Kim stood up and looked at her with a smile. He asked if that meant that if he made a statement, it would end there. He looked at her with a smile and said that she was willing to do so much for him to shut him up. Adelia stared at him and felt angry, but suppressed it inside of her. Kim said she must have been desperate. Adelia sat in silence and listened to everything Kim said. Kim stood up and pointed his index finger at her, saying that he was angry because she pretended as if nothing had happened. He asked why he had to play along with her. Adelia stood and listened to cover your eyes with your hair. Kima said he didn't need a reward. He said that all he wanted was to see the shame of the Rockdale family. After that, Adelia couldn't stand it and looked at him with a stern look and said that he was a fool. She crossed her legs and asked him who he thought he was to talk to her like that. Her eyes were shining brightly and her hair was starting to rise up. I looked at it all with a smile and asked if she was showing her true face right now. Kim said that it must have been very difficult to hide all this in yourself. Adelia started to radiate a bright aura all over the room and said that she only came to this academy to make him comfortable. But he could be so arrogant according to Adelia. She looked at him with a vicious look and said that she should just kill him. Kim sat and listened to her with a smile on his face. Adelia said that she wanted to be generous and give him one more chance, but he refused it. Kim put his hands in his pockets and told Adelia to try it. Adelia was surprised and asked what he meant by that. Kim raised his head up and said didn't Adelia say that the Ventric family had absolutely nothing to do with the attack on him? And to back up this lie she wanted to invest an incredible amount of money and time in him, but now she just wanted to kill him. Adelia started to get angry and listened in silence. Kim asked if that was all she could do. Kim crossed his legs and raised his hand with a smile. He said that even if she attacked him now, there was no way she could kill him. Adelia looked at him, then she took the lead and called out to Kim. Kim looked at her in surprise. Adelia went to the door and opened it. She said they would make him regret what happened today. Kim looked at her with a smile and said that after all, there was nothing she could do now. Kim said she was just talking to no avail. Bart said he didn't want to get involved in this one, but he didn't think he did the right thing. Bart was standing idly by and Kim called out to him. Kim, sitting on the couch, said that the fools who thought they should be worshipped were the ones he hated the most in his life. He looked sternly ahead and said that he knew what she was going to do in this situation. Kim said these fools were the ones who tried to keep everyone on a leash. Kim said that was why he hated Barch. Barch was surprised and asked what he meant by that. Afterward, Kim got up from the couch and wondered if, since there was no class today, he should have gone to the gym a little earlier than he usually did. After that, we bring everything to Valhalla Stadium. Kim was walking there in his sports uniform, looking at his phone. Tem was surprised and raised his head. He was surprised when he saw Aaron. He saw one other guy standing in front of her and wondered who he was. He was the eldest son of the Choijin family, Choi Jainon. Jainon called out to Aaron and asked if she thought she could still win. Aaron lowered her head and silently listened to everything her brother said. Jainon said that no matter how hard she trained in Valhalla, it would still be useless. He held out his hand to her with a smile and said that if she wanted to stay with the family, it was better that she didn't come to the selection test this weekend. He looked at her with his hand outstretched and said that he didn't want her to be humiliated in front of everyone. Jainon's face changed when she heard Aaron's response. Aaron said that she would not back down from her goals. Jainon looked at her and said that he was giving her one last chance, but she refused. He asked her if she really couldn't understand what was going on here. Aaron lowered her head and said that he was the only one who didn't understand, then called him a fool. Jainon looked at her with displeasure and said something that she had just called him a fool. Then Kim appeared in front of him, pointing at him with his index finger and saying that he really was a fool. Aaron looked in surprise at Kim, who suddenly appeared in front of them. I asked him why he wanted to stop someone who put in so much work. Jainon looked at him and asked who he was. He said Kim didn't even know him and swore at him. He put his hand behind his head and said why so many fools were trying to show off their power today. Kim said he didn't care about the king or the president or anyone else. Kim pointed in his direction with his index finger and asked why the hell he came to their academy. If he graduated, then let him get out of here, said Kim. Kim looked ahead and asked if Aaron agreed with him. Aaron looked at him in surprise and started nodding, saying that she agreed. Jainon looked at them with displeasure and told Choi Aaron that they would see each other at the test. Then he turned around and walked in the other direction. Aaron looked at Kim and thanked him for helping her avoid trouble. Kim said that there were no problems and then called her to practice. Aaron looked at him and said earlier, when he asked if she agreed, Aaron wanted to answer in a different way. Kim looked at her in surprise and asked how she wanted to respond. Aaron pointed up and said that she had told him not to get lost, and when they were done talking, she would have told him everything she thought about him. Who, without listening to her flow of thoughts, and told her to become. In his head, he thought that Aaron was more insane than he had imagined. Afterward, Kim and Aaron went to the gym and Tim offered to work out. Aaron supported him, then said that they would also go to train on the weekend. Kim said that he won't be able to come over the weekend as he will be on a business trip. Kim said that they would put in the maximum amount of effort today. Aaron looked at him and was surprised. After a few days, we see mountains, a city in the distance. We see a hand touching the branches. It was Kim, who was walking with a shovel while looking at his phone. He stepped forward, looking at his phone, and Barch asked him if he had come back to his hiding place. Kim said that's exactly what happened. Kim pushed the trunk apart with his hands and listened to what Barch was saying. Barch asked if he hadn't already found a lot of relics in the vault in the past stash. Kim said he was right, but he wanted to know how many caches he had left in the whole state. Barch listened idly to what Kim was saying. Kim said that if he looked for them, he thought there might still be something quite amazing hidden in the caches. Barch asked about the amazing thing. Kim, looking ahead with a smile, said that if he can find it, then the shortcomings that he had when he was Kim Hyano, he will overcome them. He looked ahead and said that maybe if he had found him earlier than 300 years ago, he wouldn't have killed him. Barch asked what he was talking about. After that, we see a lot of reporters in a huge house. It was the Choijin family. The reporters were standing and who asked, "Today will be the Choijin family's selection test." He was told that it was just like that, which was why so many such people of the same profession were gathered here. Choi Jongseok was standing in front of Aaron and Jainon. Jongseok said that the selection test is starting. Jainon stood with Aaron and listened intently to everything that Jongseok was saying. Jongseok said that as he said earlier, if they pass the selection test, they will be recognized as the successors. He looked at them and asked if they were ready. They said yes. Jongseok closed his eyes and said that the task of this test was to find the blade that was hidden in the mountains. Jainon and Aaron stood there listening intently to what he was saying. He said that the person who finds the blade and brings it to me will be recognized as the winner of this selection test. He looked ahead and said it didn't matter how they got it. Afterward, he looked at them sternly and said that killing others was strictly forbidden. After he shouted that the selection test had started, Aaron immediately rushed forward, drawing her weapon. Jainon was calmly walking down the stairs at the same time. Jainon stared at the fleeing Aaron, who was being photographed by the reporters, and thought that she had done the right thing to run. After all, this was a speed test. He looked ahead and thought, sooner or later, she would have found the blade, and then he would easily take it from Aaron and pass this selection test with ease. After that, we are transported to the moment when Jainon was leaving Aaron, who was with Kim. Jainon got a phone call at that moment. He answered the phone and held it to his ear. The unknown person asked what happened to the blade. Jainon walked forward while talking on the phone. He said that he would have to pass a qualifying test along the way, so it would take some time, or rather more than they had planned. The unknown man scratched his beard and said that this was the second time Jainon had talked about some sort of qualifying test. The man asked Jainon if he knew he was already late. Jainon offered his apologies. He said that if he could somehow get the blade, he would see if the man would keep his promise. The unknown man said that of course he would fulfill it, because he made a promise to Constellation, and it will definitely be fulfilled. Jainon looked ahead and the unknown man said that he just needed to focus on his goal. Jainon said he understood. Afterward, we flash back to the present day and see Jainon looking forward with confidence and realizing that this was his last chance. Then we see the foliage of the trees and Jainon knows it's time for him to find Eren. Eren was squatting on the ground and looking at the ground. She said that she could feel the trace of blade magic that came from the ground. She realized that she had to concentrate even harder to find it. She put out her hand, which felt and understood that it would take about 15 minutes of her time to find the sword. After that, she looked to the side in surprise and guessed if it was a magic blade mark. She looked to the side and was about to draw her sword. She saw Jainon Po standing with his hand in his pocket and looking at her. He asked with a smile if she had used her magic footprints to get out of the sword. He asked who taught her that. Eren grabbed her sword and said that Kim had taught her that. She recalled how in training, she had asked about the magic department. Kim stood idly by the other day and said he assumed she knew the basics of magic. Eren stood and listened to Kim. Kim said that she had mastered the power of lightning, and this was the basic knowledge. Kim looked at her and told her to start practicing the magic control field, but over short distances. Eren didn't know how it was done and asked how she was supposed to do it. Kim looked at her and asked why she was asking this. He asked if she wasn't taught this by her family. Eren lowered her head and said nothing. Kim idly said that it didn't matter since she only knew how to borrow Constellation's power and how to take away magic energy. Eren said that it was really like that. Kim closed his eyes and put a hand to his hair. He said he wasn't very good at it either. He looked at her and said that she should first relax her entire body and use the fingertips in her hands and feet to spread her magic weakly. Eren closed her eyes and said that she would try it now. Kim said whatever she was saying and concentrated completely. Eren began to concentrate, gathering all the mana in her body. I told her to distribute it slowly. Then I looked at how I distributed a mana all over my body. He told her to try to feel the magic in the air now that she was in this state. Eren continued to concentrate and try to feel the magic in the air. After that, she smelled like a red fire that was near Kim. Eren was surprised and opened her eyes. After that, she began to choke and bent down to catch her breath. Kim looked at her and asked if she felt anything. Eren raised her head and said that she felt and saw the form of magic that surrounded Kim. Kim looked at her and said that it was one of the ways to sense magic, and also she could notice even the very faint magic energy that flowed out of the body. It was one of the things she could do with precise control of magic. Eren started to rise, holding a wooden sword, and Kim said that the more often she used it, the easier it would be for her to sense the remnants of magic on the ground or in the air. Eren said that she understood everything, and Kim said with folded hands that if she could see the magic of things, she could also determine the form in which magical traces were formed, such as weapons that released their magical energy. Eren stood listening intently to Kim. Kim said that if she trained more on it, she would be able to see the silhouettes clearly and she could learn the rest by herself. Eren looked at him with a smile and said that she understood everything. Then we flash back to the present and see her looking at Jainon. Jainon glared at her angrily and someone asked what. He started to approach her and said that he understood who it was. Jainon looked at her with a smile, said it was the same. You're the same guy who was with her outside the Valhalla training hall and he had such a talent even though he looked so stupid, asked Jainon. Eren got angry at this and said that he was much stronger than a fool like Jainon. Eren asked him why he had come here in the first place. Jainon closed his eyes and smiled as he pulled out his weapon and asked if she really didn't know why he was here. He started to pull out his weapons, which were emitting purple mana sparks, and then he swung them at Eren's christening and said that's what he came here for. But he was surprised after a few seconds. He didn't understand why she was pushing him away. When he felt resistance, he moved his sword to the side and didn't expect this from Eren. He looked at Eren, who was slowly walking towards him while emitting blue and mana streams from her weapon. Jainon didn't understand how she had become so strong in such a short time. After that, we see Kim stretch out his hand to the side and start concentrating magic in his body and start spreading it all over the ground. He concentrated and thought. He couldn't believe that this wasn't his hiding place either. He clearly remembered hiding many hiding places in various places, and there was only one hiding place in all of Valhalla. After that, he saw a circle of energy form near the ground. Kim opened his eyes and with a smile realized that the cache was here. He was very glad that he found it. Then he looked to the side and realized that it was to his left. He looked in the direction of the forest, and then he saw something explode and emit bright streams of energy. Kim was very surprised when he saw all this. After that, we are transported to Eren, who fought with swords against Jainon. Eren started swinging her sword and emitted bright lightning. She threw a punch, but Jainon blocked it with her sword. He looked at his sword and saw it trembling somehow. He looked at Eren with a smile and asked if she had studied to be a wild boar at the academy. He said he could see her growing physically stronger. Eren held the sword and radiated bright streams of mana from his sword. She told Jainon to give up the double blade. He looked at her with a smile and asked if she was crazy. After that, he immediately rushed towards her with his sword in hand and said that such an illegitimate child like her just didn't deserve it. Erin took up a stance and began to gather energy into her sword. She watched as Jainon kicked off the ground and headed in her direction. Erin held the sword in her hands and thought about how I should turn around and strike. Then she swung a swing at Jainon and he dropped his sword from his hands and started to fall to the ground. Erin calculated her actions and repeated them in her head. She, holding her sword in her hands, said that when he released his sword, she should have hit him. After that, she slashed the back of the sword at Jainon's body. Jainon was shocked by the force and he coughed and tried to catch his breath. After that, Erin stood and looked at Jainon's body that was lying on the ground. She waved her sword and exhaled with her eyes closed. She looked ahead and said that she didn't even think that she would be able to deal him even one hit, but no one would think that she just went ahead and easily defeated him. She bent down and picked up the thing that was lying on the floor and said that it was great and it only remained to take the double blade. But she stood up in horror when she heard a voice behind her. Jainon asked her if she really thought she could beat him so easily. Jainon then stood in front of her, holding his sword on his shoulder and emitting a vicious purple energy. Erin stared at him and couldn't understand why it had happened. Jainon closed his eyes and asked with a smile why she was interested in this. He pointed the sword in her direction and asked her what she thought had happened. After which, Erin started swinging her sword. She threw a punch, but it went over the top. Erin was surprised when she saw Jainon bend down and pass, trying to hit her from below with his sword. Erin was horrified when she realized that he had dodged her punch at such close range. After Jainon delivered a sweeping punch, leaving a bright purple trail, Erin flew backward and fell to the floor. She just stared at Jainon standing on his feet. Jainon looked at her and asked if she was going to get up from the ground. Erin looked down and Jainon said that it would be best for everyone if she just decided not to get up and gave up. Erin started coughing and noticed that Radha was on his stomach. Erin started to tremble and writhe in pain. She covered the wound with her hand and Jainon stood and watched the whole thing radiating a hacked aura. Jainon looked at her and repeated that he had told her not to try to get up, because if she moved, she would die. Erin held up her hand and said that when he mentioned contracts, did he mean that he had signed a contract with an entire constellation? Erin looked at him and was surprised when she fully listened to Jainon. Jainon Po said that since he was the leader of the Genes Guild, he signed a contract with a top-ranked constellation to save his face. But for now, he's on the side of the devotees. Erin stared ahead and began to think. She had heard of devotees before. Erin remembered that they were the third most dangerous evil group in the entire world. Erin looked at Jainon and asked why he signed a contract with 1C of the Loyal Constellation, because she doesn't understand it at all. Erin started asking questions. She asked if the benefits of joining them were better. They were better than enjoying a normal life. Jainon, holding the sword, said with a smile if she was really interested in all this. He told her to listen carefully. He began to smile wickedly and said that the incredible strength and power and deviations from the needs for feelings were just fine. Erin held her wound and looked at him in shock when she heard about the deviation. Erin was very surprised when Jainon squatted down and said that he was only 12 years old. He looked at her and said that he had worked in their family guild since childhood. He revealed that at an age when he was only interested in games, Choijin's family expected him to be an exemplary eldest son. The reason why he was still in the Genes Guild was because of his father's observation. He said that it was never his personal choice. Erin sat and listened intently to everything Jainon said. Jainon Po said that even as a teenager, he didn't regret it at all. It was then that he met a devotee. He remembers the man who called him on the phone and told him that as soon as he met him, he was immediately told to join the devotees. Jainon said that the man had encouraged him by saying that he would be able to satisfy the desires that had been in his heart since he was a child. Erin sat up and looked worse. Jainon said that the man probably already knew about his temperament. He looked at her with an evil smile and said that he always had an aversion to people. He said that he could not just join them. He said that he just had to fulfill one condition. Jainon said that he should just get one relic of their family, and the relic was a double blade that they had to find to pass the selection exam in their family. Jainon looked at Erin and said that if she just gave up, then I would have to start all of this, and also they wouldn't have to start the second elimination test. You just gave me a double blade. Erin was surprised when she heard all this. Jainon told her all this and Erin asked about the second qualifying exam. Jainon asked if she really didn't remember it. He told her that 10 years ago, the eldest daughter of the Choi Jin family, or rather the older sister of Choi Erin, participated in the first selection test. Erin was shocked when she found out about her older sister. Erin sat there and looked at the smiling Jainon who was telling her all this with a shocked face. Erin asked if she hadn't been missing for a very long time. Jainon said that during that selection test, he couldn't control his desires. Jainon's face changed, and he started to talk about it viciously. Erin was horrified when she learned that Jainon had killed her on the mountain before searching for the double blade. Jinon closed his eyes and put his hand behind his head. He said that in the end, he couldn't find the double blade and suffered a terrible injury and failed the qualifying test. He said that if it wasn't for this one, he would have been able to join the devotees even 10 years ago. Erin held her wound and lowered her head. Jinon said then that the father somehow found a secret and hospitable sister Choi. Erin weakly attempts to save her. Jinon said that he left it there in the hope that it would just disappear. Erin asked where she was now. Jinon looked at her with a serious face and asked if she really wanted to know. Afterward, he said she should just disappear. He started telling her about her mom who fainted. He said it happened because she saw her daughter's face in her face. Erin sat and listened to all this while holding her wound. Jinon looked at the suffering Erin and said that now that he knew where the double blade was, he would go. He started to get to his feet and swung his sword at Erin, who was sitting on the ground. He said to say hi to his older sister for him. He started to strike, and the sword was almost touching her neck. But then a punch rang out and Jinon was shocked when she saw that I was the one who stopped the sword. He looked forward with Erin, and they saw Kim standing there holding Jinon's sword. Kim looked at it all with a displeased face and asked what the fool was doing. Jinon looked at him and told him that it was none of his business and that he shouldn't get involved as it was a family showdown. Kim looked at him with displeasure and said what a crazy family is representing his sister's leg 6. Then he waved his hand and Jinon flew to the side and hit a tree, causing it to break. Erin looked up and called out to Kim, who was standing over her, holding her sword in its scabbard. Kim looked at Erin and asked why she was here. Kim looked at her and thought about how he had come here to look for hiding places, and one of them was in this direction. After that, he looked at Erin and saw that there was blood on her stomach. He turned away and said that he just had some business in that direction. He told me to stand back and gather some magic to heal the wound. Erin lowered her head, holding her hands, and smiled. Jinon got to his feet and walked forward. He said that it was interesting who Kim was, that he would just show up all of a sudden and interfere in their affairs. He said that Kim was the same student he met in Valhalla. Kim was standing in front of him, holding his weapon. Jinon also said that it was a white family matter, so he had to die, and then headed towards Kim with his weapon pointed at him. His weapon began to glow with purple lightning. He threw a punch, but Kim easily dodged out of the way. Jinon looked at him and didn't understand how he was able to dodge. Kim was leaning back a little. He tightened his grip on his sword and said that when a guy hits with his sword, he shouldn't aim at a guy who is just standing still, and he should think about the fact that he can dodge with ease. Kim then stretched out his arm and threw punches at Jinon's body, causing him to fly backwards and start coughing up blood. Kim got close to him and held the sword in front of Jinon's face. Jinon looked ahead and thought that when he attacked him, he was already prepared for his attacks. After Kim struck Jinon's body once more, the impact was so strong that the ground Jinon was lying on cracked from the shockwave. Jinon fainted. Kim stood up, raised his weapon, and watched in silence. Kim turned to the injured Erin and asked if she was okay. He walked over to her adjusting his hood and asked if she could walk. Erin said something that she wasn't sure and needed to be given some time to try. Afterward, Kim was surprised when he felt a dark, evil energy behind him. He turned to the side and saw Jinon's body begin to release a dark aura. Kim looked at it all and Barch said it was sword magic. Kim said he knew and suggested that this guy was also a villain. Jinon got to his feet and said something about Kim being a complete fool while holding his sword in his hand. Kim watched all this and Jinon said that Kim was just a newbie in Valhalla and he shouldn't think that he could beat the guild leader. After that, he jumped up, swinging his sword. Kim put down your weapons and blocked the kick with ease. Jinon didn't understand what was going on, because even though he hit his magic, Kim didn't even move. Kim started swinging his two arm and asked if he was definitely the guild leader. He then slashed at his body with a smile and sent Jinon flying backwards. Kim asked if it would really help him. Jinon jumped back, trying to catch her breath. Jinon looked at it, and I wondered if it was really the strength of a 17-year-old boy. He noticed that it blocked all of his attacks and didn't even counterattack. He looked ahead and realized that he had no choice but to use it. He reached into his pocket and realized that it had a lot of side effects, but if he got one more hit from Kim, he would definitely be finished. He took out a crystal that shone brightly. He said with a smile that it was a stone of the past. He took a bite out of it and said that with it, he would be able to make a preliminary contract with Constellation. Kim watched in silence. After Jinon ate the crystal, he started laughing like a psychopath. He spread his arms, and his dark energy began to radiate even more aura. Afterward, we see reporters who were at the filming location begin to fall from the spot as the earthquake started. A lot of people were panicking, and someone pointed their index finger and said that something was happening there. Many people started to look to the side and saw a dark purple pillar of energy begin to rise up. My father looked ahead and realized that it was sword magic. It was dense enough to be seen by the general public of ordinary people. He looked ahead at the gathered energy and realized that the double blade was still there. He thought about it and realized that such an event in the middle of the selection test was not normal, and he definitely had to go there and see what was happening there. Jainon was standing in front of Kim, and Kimmy started picking at his ear and said that he was just watching what he was going to do, but still ended up doing something just to increase his magic a little. Jainon smilingly said something too dumb to understand. He said it was just an additional effect. A dragon of dark energy formed behind him, and he said that it was part of his power that he got thanks to a temporary contract with Constellation, and now Kim will definitely die here, Jainon said. After the dragon started to manifest, and it was the dragon that killed everyone, recognizes the sacred relic and descends. The dragon who killed everyone was showing her teeth as if she was glad to come down after a long time. He fiercely looked ahead, and the system screen says that the dragon that was killing everyone has activated its all-seeing eye ability. Kim looked at him viciously, releasing his intensely red aura. When the dragon saw this, it was afraid. The dragon stood in front of him in terror. The system message said that the dragon that was killing everyone had deactivated the all-seeing eye. The dragon stood in front of him and did nothing. The dragon that was killing everyone activated the all-seeing eye and once again saw the evil red aura of Kim. The dragon opened its mouth and was horrified. Jainon looked at all this and didn't understand what was wrong with the Constellation. The dragon said he had to get out of here. Constellation said that the dragon that killed everyone rejected the sacred relic summoning and terminated the contract. Jainon looked away without understanding what was happening. Constellation said that the dragon that killed everyone would take all its power and run away. Jainon looked away as Constellations terminated the contract and gradually disappeared. Jainon looked to the side and Kim leaned his sword against his body. He put his hand down with a smile and asked if he thought he could kill him. After that, he took and hit the sword with his left hand and knocked Jainon back. Jainon was knocked unconscious by the force and fell to the floor. After that, we see a man who was silently shocked. It was the leader of the devotees, the Dragon King Han Nibble. A message could be seen on the screen saying that the dragon who was killing everyone was saying that you were causing me more trouble. The dragon said that he wanted to disappear from this mortal world. Han apologized in shock. He also said that he was apologizing, and then he knelt down and lowered his head to the floor, asking for forgiveness. The dragon said it warns it not to distribute artificial relics in the future. Han, with his head on the floor, was shaking all over and said that he understood everything. The dragon told him to behave. Han stood with his head down and said nothing. Then he raised his head and wondered what it was. He didn't understand why Constellation was so enraged. He repeated the name relic in his head and realized that it meant that the brat he had placed in the Choijin family had done something wrong. He got to his feet and looked ahead. He didn't know what the hell the man was doing. He asked Constellation if they could tell you what went wrong. He once again called out to Constellation, after he with a serious face radiating his aura said that he should find out what was going on here. After that, we see the dorms of Valhalla. It was already late at night outside and we see who went to his room. He took off his hood and began to undress. He put his briefcase down on the table and started rummaging through it. He looked over with a smile and said that he had finally reached the divine gate and taken out the records. Barch asked what the divine arts were. Kim sat on the couch with a smile and said that was the main reason why he was looking for hiding places. I said that this breathing technique that could raise a person's magic power to a very high level. Barch idly asked if there were any differences from the breathing technique he used before reincarnation. Kim said that the breathing technique he used before was complete garbage, and when he was a jerk, he just bought it at the market and mastered it and used it until the very end. Kim started to read the records and said that, in addition, when he found this divine art 300 years ago, he couldn't change his breathing technique because it was already ingrained in his body, and when he fought with Barch, he was very badly injured. He recalls his battle against him and realized that due to his poor breathing technique, he had run out of magic power. After that, he started smiling viciously and said that now he could start all over again with this new body. He touched the notes and said that he would stop training his body for a while, so he would have to learn the divine art first. Barch looked ahead and said about the situation earlier. Barch said he left that injured girl a crazy guy. Kim, holding the notes, thought about it. He looked ahead and said that he heard someone approaching, so he left them. He said they should handle it themselves. He, remembering the moment when he threw the fatal punch at Jainon and he fell unconscious on the ground. He looked at his body while holding his sword in his hands. Barch asked if Kim had killed him. Kim started to get nervous and wonder if he could have killed him. He said that he had already been a participant in another incident in Valhalla, so if he was a participant in another one, he would definitely be in trouble. He remembers his body and says that there are some tiny traces of magic left on it, so he must survive. Barch agreed. Kim recalls how he approached the wounded Eren and asked if she could become. He looked at her and held out his hand to the side. He was about to say something, but then he noticed that someone in the other direction was approaching them. Eren looked at Kim and Kim realized that maybe the Eren family was already on their way after seeing the sword mage. This made it difficult enough to find the hiding places, and then he called out to Aaron. He stood in front holding his briefcase, said that her family was coming here on the way, so he said I'll just sit and wait, and he needs to do something in this place, so he'll hit the road. Aaron said that everything was fine. Kim pointed his finger at Jainon's unconscious body, and Kim Pro said to tell his family that she was the one who knocked that person out. He put on his hood and said that he had put in a lot of effort, so he was lying unconscious after he said goodbye to her. Aaron said with a smile that she understood everything and said that there were problems in the academy. Meanwhile, her family was already approaching from behind. Kim lay on the bed and thought about it all. He took the notes and looked at them. He said that in any case, once he mastered the divine arts, he would return the remaining storage stones. He said that the last time he absorbed their magic power, he wasn't able to transfer all of it behind his magic low abilities either. Afterward, we see the dorm building and Kim says he needs to rest. After that, we move to another location and see the buildings. It was the Choijin family building. Jongseok was sitting at the table, and there were other people sitting nearby who were looking at him. Jongseok looked ahead and said that thanks to the press who came to film their family's selection test, the articles appeared immediately. He asked if they were all counted. People looked at it and said they had read them, and most of them were like that. After that, the girl opened the tablet and looked at the article where there was a photo of Jainon. The man also opened the article and read everything that was written there. People began to assume that the Choijin family was related to the devotees. Jongseok put his hand to his head and said it was a complete mess. He said that he couldn't believe that there was a villain in the Choijin family. He looked at the people and said that in addition to this, the association had published an official letter and he had received a statement from them. He looked ahead and said that when something like this happened to the Ventric family, it had nothing to do with the family, so they just kept quiet. But this approach definitely won't work with them anymore. He looked at the man in the suit and said that Choi Jainon was loyal to the police. He looked to the side and asked how Choi Erin was. The man said they sent her to their family's hospital for treatment. Jongseok looked to the side and asked what her condition was. The man said that she was significantly injured, but the bleeding stopped, her organs were not damaged, and she should not have needed any major operations in order to restore her to a completely healthy state. With his head thrown back and his eyes closed, Jongseok exhaled and said that he understood the situation. A man in a suit and glasses also said that he wanted to talk about Choi Erin. He said there were several articles about her, too. The man in the suit looked at Jongseok and said that they mentioned geniuses who defeated a member of the devotees as a mere student. Valhalla Academy. Following in the footsteps of Kim Joo-hyuk, Choi Erin destroyed many devotees, and that's a tragedy. The man said that there are still similar cases. Jongseok looked ahead and said that she went against her own family, and there were articles about it asked by Jongseok. The man asked wasn't there a relief. He said that this selection round ended with Housey, but the next head of the family was confirmed. The man said that such articles will help her firmly establish herself as a receiver. Jongseok looked to the side and said that it was definitely so. He looked ahead and thought. He thought it was good that Erin had a legitimate chance of success, but defeating Jainon alone was very strange. He remembers looking at the injured Erin who was lying in front of Jainon's defeated body. Erin looked at him and said that her brother attacked her with sinister magic, so she knocked him out. Jongseok looked at her and said that he could see it, but there was a lot of magic power above the mountains. He asked her how she had managed to defeat her brother. Two men in a suit lifted the girl up, holding her up early. Erin looked ahead and said that it was mine that Kim Joo-hyuk taught her. Jongseok watched the article and read an article about Kim, where he pointed his fingers at people and sent out all the guild guides. We are transported to Valhalla, where a huge complex is located in the middle of picturesque mountains, and the sun is shining brightly outside the window. Hyuk walks over to his desk, taking off his backpack and preparing to sit on a chair. Suddenly, he notices someone who completely captures his gaze. It was Choi Erin, sitting calmly in front of him as if nothing had happened. He is very surprised because he thought that she was hospitalized, but it seems that everything is fine with her. He sat down at his desk and stared at her. There was a calm expression on his face. Suddenly, Choi felt eyes on her, so she turned in the direction of the viewer. When she saw who was watching her, she smiled sweetly and waved. His classmates follow behind him and get very excited, asking each other that Choi Erin just waved and smiled at them. The second answered that he dreamed, because it was more likely for him. Hyuk thought abruptly and began to remember sitting at his desk at home, reading a book and holding a white fire in his hand. Suddenly, he heard his phone start shaking with notifications. Picking up his phone, he started reading messages from Choi Erin, who told him that she wouldn't be able to train for a while because the doctor had strictly forbidden her to do any physical activity. And then I sent a sad smiley face. Hyuk noticed that this wasn't surprising, considering how much the bleeding was going on. And then he answered her, telling her that he was going to do his own thing for the next few days, so let him rest. Choi started throwing off a very large number of emojis, and Hyuk texted her to stop. He was very dissatisfied, holding the phone in his hands, shouted why spam so much then. Hayek looked up from his phone as Barch told him there was something he should know about. Hayek asked what he should know. He was flying in some space and scratching his chin, saying that it was the black magic that they had recently encountered. There were pictures of space in the background of the room, and Hayek asked him if he remembered something about this magic. Barch said no. Hayek asked, then what's the matter? Barch was still flying in the void, one hand on top of the other, and he was also scratching his chin, thinking that it wasn't just that he had forgotten about it, but that he had a feeling that something was preventing him from remembering it. Hayek crossed his arms and looked at him and asked what could possibly be bothering him about that scoundrel. Barch still flew in the void, put one hand on the other, and also scratched his chin, but from a different view, and said that he could be wrong. But probably if the second condition on that scoreboard was fulfilled, then nothing would interfere with him. But he stressed that this is most likely only a theory. Hayek looked at the same board that said that the condition can only be met if he has a dagger. He wondered what the second condition was, the Eye of the Great Forest. This is just a training reserved seat for assessing knowledge, how can there be anything else? Throwing his hands behind his head, he leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and continued to ponder that people with low exam scores were being expelled from the academy. Starting to scratch his head with dissatisfaction, he thought that he would really sit and wait for these exams, considering that this is a huge waste of time. When he came back from his memories, he was already sitting at the desk, also leaning back and with his hands behind his head. He knew that in any case, he needed some time to get used to the shindog. And now he can go look for this Eye of the Great Forest. By then, Ligon had entered the classroom, opening the doors and telling the students to take their seats. Standing at the lectern, he looked at all of his students. All the students were in their seats and were all assembled. The teacher said that before he started the class, he needed to make a small announcement. He looked at them confidently and asked what everyone here knew about the interscholastic competition that was taking place next month. The students shouted once about what they knew. Hayek was still leaning back in his chair, thinking. His face showed that he was a little angry. In his mind, he asked Barch if that was what he was thinking. Barch replied that the teacher had mentioned it after the midterms. Legong, who was still looking at the students with confidence, added to his words that their academy needs participants, so the selection will be based on the results of the final exams. Then he turned to Hayek, telling him to go to the staff room with him. Hayek was already taken aback, removing one hand from the back of his head, asking what he was going to do. After a while the sun was still shining outside, they were in the staff room. Legon, sitting in front of Hayek, was a little worried and said that the meeting place couldn't be changed. Hayek noticed that he didn't have to invite him there so often. Legon, closing his eyes and still a little worried, replied that to some extent he was right. But then I decided to tell him about his participation in the interscholastic competition. Hayek immediately refused, but Legon was shocked and had a lot of questions, so he said that he hadn't even explained anything yet, and Legon was already refusing. Legon sat across from him, his hands on his feet, his eyes half closed. Hayek asked what these competitions were all about, and Ligon said that he had talked about it in detail in the lectures, but decided to explain it to him again. He went on to say that there were 3 of the world's largest hunter training institutions. Korean is Valhalla, the same large complex that they are currently located in. There is also a Chinese one. This is a White Lotus, which looks like a huge Chinese building. And third, it is American Heroes. This is a huge tower around which everything is in purple color. Ligong showed him 3 fingers, adding that each of the 3 schools would select several freshmen as their representatives and invite them to participate in the competition. These competitions include sparring, maze escape, and more. As he sat there, sweat dripping down his cheek, he said that was why they were planning to send out those who scored the highest in the practice exam. Hayek just sat there, yawning, right in front of him. Ligon became even more worried and asked what was so uninteresting to him. Hayek scratched his ear and said that if his academy won first place, not only would all the participants get a pretty substantial scholarship, but they would also be showered with money until they were old and a lot of other things. But he's not interested at all. Ligon crossed his arms over his face and asked if he wanted to go to the Great Forest. These words hurt Hayek so much that his eyes immediately lit up. And he said the Eye of the Great Forest. Legon, still sitting in front of him with his arms crossed, replied that yes, this is the place where the final exam will be held. Looking at Hayek, he added that the interscholastic competition is scheduled for Valhalla, so the final task will be to enter the Eye of the Great Forest. This task will be about the same as the final exam. Those who pass it will automatically receive credit on the final exam. Legon, still sitting in front of him with his arms crossed, but already looking from above, says that if Hayek does not agree, then the exam will have to be taken again. Hayek happily replied that he understood, and there was a fighting grin and joy on his face as if he was beaming. Therefore, he happily agreed to participate in the interscholastic competition. We are transported to the United Kingdom, Ventricle Manor. It was night outside, and in the tower sat Adelia Ventric, her arms crossed and wearing a fur-lined cape. By asking how things are progressing, 2 of her subjects bowed to her and told her that everything was progressing smoothly, but the preparation would probably take another month. She looked at them blankly and told them to continue. The innkeepers raised their heads and looked at her, and she asked something else about how the people of Rockdale were doing. One of the guys replied that there were no oddities in their actions that should be mentioned. She pointed at him and asked if they knew that they should immediately report any inappropriate behavior, and he stood in front of her with his eyes closed and said that of course he knew. And then he added that even though it had nothing to do with them, some disturbing news had reached their ears. She still looks at him blankly and asks him what the news is. The second person served, still worshipping her, and behind him bills were falling and there was a huge building. He replies that it is obvious that they are building a building out of paper bills at the market. She looks at the 2 of them and asks what kind of building is made of paper bills. The first applicant says that they believe that the black cat is directly responsible for this. Particles began to appear around Adelia, and it was obvious that she was not happy. She wondered what he was up to since he hadn't done anything like this before. Suddenly, a yellow frame appears in front of Adelia, on which it is written that the mask orders her to tell in more detail. She looked at it and started to worry because it was Mr. Constellation. We are transported to the market, district number 7. There was a full moon in the sky, and there were also many stars, which was extremely beautiful. In the big city, even at night, work was carried out, lifting cranes hauled some construction materials. The black cat was standing in front of the window, watching the construction going on. He knew that for the sake of Constellation, he would do whatever they were asked to do. Bills were flying in front of the building where the crane was working with the cargo, and the black cat wondered what the point of building a building out of paper bills was. A girl with bright red eyes crossed her arms and said that it was a gift for him. She actually looked a little crazy. Returning to the black cat, where gold bills were flying around the city, he asked why he was ordered to build a building out of money. A notification appeared in front of him, where it says that the two-faced ruler says that this is a gift. The black cat was a little worried after reading this message, and I wondered who this gift was for, but then I started to guess. But then the two-faced ruler sent him another message asking if he had found the guy who sold the ring. The black cat replied that he hadn't found it yet. After all, he only knows some of the features of his face, voice, and clothes. Gesturing with his hand during the conversation, he stressed that he was trying his best. He said that he still has access to the contact information of that day, and they are doing everything possible to find him. The two-faced ruler sent a message where he completely filled it with the words "hurry up." It was very creepy. The black cat became agitated and already got confused in the letters, but said that he would do it. We are transported to the Valhalla teacher's room, where Ligon is sitting at his laptop at his workplace, and then he scratches his head, thinking about something. Suddenly, Sankal walked past him, coffee in hand, and asked if he had already chosen any students. Ligon turned to look at him and said that he was done. Sankal asked if he could take a look at the list. Ligon handed him a laptop that showed everything. Only 5 students from Valhalla participated in the interscholastic competition. Ligong added that everyone except Du Junjin is in his class. Sangcheol, sipping his coffee, asked in surprise that he was even able to persuade Hayek to participate. This impressed him. Ligon, looking at him, replied that at first he was not at all eager, but as soon as he whispered about the Eye of the Great Forest, he abruptly changed his mind and agreed. Sankal, standing next to Ligong, threw back his head and drank coffee, said that if he heard about the Great Forest, most people would be confused. Ligon didn't know about this. Sankal then looked down at his laptop and asked if maybe he didn't know what the Eye of the Great Forest was like at all, since he sleeps in every class. As he drank his coffee, strange thoughts began to creep into his head, so he looked a little creepy. He believes that it seems that he needs the academy only for his own purposes. Sankal, standing in front of Ligong with his hands in his pockets, asked if he could get these kids together for a little training session. Ligon happily agreed and said that he would see to it that their schedule was released. Sankal started walking away from him, saying that then he should go. A few days later, these 5 students are all sitting on chairs next to each other in a small classroom. There was Oseniak with blonde hair and a stern look. Yu Soyeon, a cute girl with purple hair. She sat with her eyes closed. Choi Erin, she was sitting in thought and looking out the window as if she was dreaming about something. Jo Joon-jin, a green-haired guy with glasses who was a little worried, as well as Kim Joo Hyuk. He sat with his hands in his pockets and looked like the coolest guy in the academy. Sankal entered the classroom, opening the door. As he passed the students, he asked if everything was still there. And when I counted how many people came, I realized that there were so many on the list. With a textbook in his hands and one finger in his pocket, he said that he was happy to meet them. He added that they had crossed paths with him in the academy building one way or another, but decided to mention his name, Lee Sangxiao, the chief combat instructor. Looking at all the students, still holding a textbook, he said that the reason they were all there was because of their participation in the interscholastic competition that would take place soon. Sankal wanted to tell them about the training they were going to do. Pointing his fingers at the number 3, he indicated that they would only have to complete 3 tasks. The first is a duel between students. It's like an entrance test they've already taken. Yu Soyan sat and listened to all this. She looked a little displeased, and her eyes were half closed. The second challenge is a team battle. It is a duel between participants of different schools where they will represent Valhalla. Oseniuk also sat and listened calmly. Bandages were visible on his hands. Sankal, standing behind the board, gestured with his hands and said that all 3 teams will fight at the same time, so the main criterion for passing this task will be the ability to quickly assess the situation. And the third test is related to the Eye of the Great Forest. Hayek was immediately wary after hearing this, so he started listening carefully. Sankal put his hand on his belt and said that the final exam will be postponed for them. He can't give more information, but the Eye of the Great Forest is a maze. In the middle of a huge forest with sharp branches, there is a maze, the entrance to which is guarded by 2 guards. Sankal adds that as the name implies, this is a dense forest, unlike a normal forest. The gate to it is heavily guarded and designed in such a way that anyone who tries to enter it by air will be captured. The only way to get there is through the main entrance. Sankal was looking at the students with his hand in his pocket, and we can see the view from above. And he went on to say that each of the teams will have to enter this gate. They will hear more specific details on the day of the competition. Opening the book that he had been holding in his hand all this time, he said that they were moving on. I decided to explain the specifics and format of the team battle, while they already had some experience working as a team during the dungeon raid. Hayek heard this, looked at him with a blank expression, and mentally asked what the explanation was. Then, he started rocking his chair back and forth, wondering if there was a barrier. Why couldn't he just break through? Hayek figured it probably wasn't that easy. Sankal closed his book and held it in his hand. He finished saying his explanation, which Hayek ignored, and then he decided to explain how their training will take place. He asked if the students had any questions. Among all of them, only Hayek raised his hand. Soyan and Seniuk were looking at him. With his hand still in the air, he asked if it was okay to train alone. Sankal, putting away his book and holding it against his stomach, says that it doesn't matter. If he wants to do it alone, then let him do it. He asked who else wanted to do the same. Choi raised her hand and said that then she would also train alone. Sangxiao looked at her in surprise to think that Choi Aaron was in league with him. He said all right, let her train alone, and then asked if anyone else wanted to. There was complete silence among the students sitting in the classroom. Sankal said that then they would be done for today and would only see each other during practice. Everyone started to disperse, but Choi and Hayek were still sitting there. Hayek was in his own thoughts. Looking up, he thought that before the competition started, he should have time to master the technique he needed. Thanks to Mana, he will improve his form, and the rest of the time he needs to devote to training. Suddenly, Choi called out to Hayek. He pulled himself out of his thoughts and stared straight at her with one eye. Choi looked at him and beamed. She asked him if she should take part in the general training session. Hayek asked her back why she was asking him this. Isn't she all alone? Choi held her stomach and looked down. Hayek added a question. Didn't she say that she wouldn't be able to train hard? Then she stared at him, and there were sparks in her eyes. And she remembered sitting right in front of Ligong, who had told her that he had read an article about her. So he was worried about her condition, but he thought that he should still ask her personally if she wanted to participate in the competition. He added if she was going to. He guessed correctly. Choi was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, and there were bookshelves behind her. She asked if Kim Ju Hayek would be there. Ligon was very surprised by this question, but replied that he had heard that Hayek would be there. Choi replied that then she would be too. Ligon was distraught, so he protested that her body hadn't fully recovered yet. Choi replied with a smile on her face and a sparkle in her eyes that she would be fine. Ligon replied that he understood. We go back to Choi, who was sitting in the audience. She was also sitting with her arms crossed, but this time in a chair. She was thinking that she was already halfway to becoming the head of the family. Choi's face lit up at the thought of having a new target thanks to Hayek. She stared at him as he just sat there, hands in his pockets, wondering why she was staring at him like that. Choi smiled sweetly and was embarrassed. Everything around her shone with light. Her new goal is to become stronger with Hayek and help him achieve what he dearly wants, just as he had helped her. Hayek was so confused that he was sweating profusely. He asked her what was going on right now, and at first she says, and then she pauses and starts laughing horribly. Hayek told her not to overdo it anyway. Standing up from the chair, he turned to her and added that then they should focus on mana control for most of the training. During classes, she should keep all activity of her legs to a minimum. Choi understood his words and said yes. While Hayek left the office, opening the door, Choi was still sitting on the chair. Hayek said goodbye to her, saying that once he was done with his business, he would help her out a little. We are transported to an abandoned building. It was deep into the night outside. Someone was missing a few teeth and bleeding from the nose. This kid was screaming for mercy. He was sitting on the roof of that abandoned building. There was blood everywhere around him, and he was also sitting without a t-shirt and tied up. And there were two people standing in front of him, so they tortured him. He begged for mercy, asked to be released, and said that he would give everything they asked. One of the bandits took out a sharp knife that even glinted in the moonlight, and then he threw it right at the guy's heart. He was bleeding profusely, and he was screaming in pain. But after such a blow, he died instantly. A bandit girl named Samsel Al asks a bandit boy named Samsel Fox, couldn't he just get it over with quickly? He said it was funny. She stood with her arms crossed. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She reached for her phone, asking if it was a new order. The fox asked that this was a new target to kill. She, holding the phone in her hands, replied that yes. There was a photo of Hayek on her phone, and the inscription that he is a new goal. She looked at him and remembered that he was Valhalla's new apprentice. The guy they just killed is tied up with a knife through his heart. The fox started to pull the knife out of his body, and then, holding the bloody knife in his hand, he looked at Al and asked why Samsel was involved in the murder of a schoolboy. She replied that most likely the client just paid off a tidy sum. Lisa kept her hands on her waist while Al stared at her phone and asked what time frame they needed to meet. Al said they were supposed to kill him in a month during an interscholastic competition. They both walk away from that dead guy, talking like they didn't do anything. Fox asked why they couldn't kill Hayek right now. Al replied that the security of the academy and dorm was particularly tight right now, so he was going to break through the magic barrier and kill their student. She stared at him while he said that she thought it would be easier during the competition, where other schools would also be present. Al said that Alia had already told her everything. Al began to repeat her words, imagining the great forest in her mind. She said that according to the customer's information, on the third day the competition will be held in a place called the Eye of the Great Forest. This is a mysterious maze located in the forest. After leaving the abandoned building, Al added that she had heard that the task of the students is to go through this maze. The fox asked what it meant that there would be no instructors in the forest. Looking ahead, she replied that there would be no one there but a small flying observer drone. And with the exception of a few guards at the entrance to the maze, all instructors will monitor the stage from the observation room. The fox, looking ahead, confidently said that Alia will first get there first, and they will follow right behind her, and this is not a joke at all. As she walked out of the building, Al noticed that completing this task was a priority. The fox replied that he knew. A month later, on the first day of the interscholastic competition, in some huge field and in sunny weather, everyone sat in their seats and watched the performance. Everyone was cheering, and between the crowd sat Uria and Rockdale. Rockdale stared ahead with a scowl on his face and rested his chin on his hands. Until then, we're transported to Rockdale's house, where he's sitting on the couch and talking on the phone. He warned his father that he had received his money. Rockdale's father, Eden Ventrick, answered his son's phone, which he understood. Rockdale, looking ahead, told his father that he had paid a commission with the money. He assigned Il Shinjo to kill Kim Ju Hyuk. Eden Ventrick was horrified by the words. She shouted to her son that he really did this. Rockdale was sitting on the couch, and we can see his back. He replied that he had already said that his father's decisions would not affect him in any way. My father is still worried, sweat running down his face. He listened to the story of his son, who said that this time he would deal with him himself. After all, Samsel accepted the order. His father was even more frightened by his words, because Il Shinju is a well-known group of Ripper killers. This team consists of 3 people and causes fear when it is mentioned. The 2 murderers and a lady. Rockdale put his hand on his knee, and his father told him to keep a low profile. And so we went back to him on the podium, where he was sitting and waiting for Hayek to come out. After all, Samsel told him that they would deal with him during the competition. He stared straight ahead, and he knew he shouldn't be there. Standing up from his seat, he turned to Yuri and said that they should go. She also got up and followed him. At the lectern, in front of all the students, there was a man who spoke into the microphone greeting. Then he introduced himself. He was a white-haired man with a mustache. His name was Shim DeQuoon, and he was the chairman of the Valhalla office. He continued to speak into the microphone, saying that he believed that some representatives of each school should be introduced before the competition. And the first will be China, White Lotus. There were 5 students in shirt sleeves standing there, and 1 girl was even carrying a katana. The second place was taken by the USA, a group of heroes. They all stood there with pride in their eyes and their hands on their belts. Finally, the man said. He froze in anticipation. Korea, the Valhalla group. Our group was standing there, led by Hayek. Shim's eyes lit up and he added that the competition will last for 3 days. Their task for today is individual sparring. Standing in front of him were all 3 groups that he had asked representatives from each school to return to their waiting rooms and wait for the results of the match to be announced. The closest thing to them was Suncheol, who was looking at them with his arms crossed. He looked down at them and just didn't say anything. Suddenly, someone called out to him, so he turned to see who it was. And the main instructor of heroes, Jack Rover, was walking towards him. He waved sweetly at him, noting that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. As they approached each other, Sankol joked about him being 3rd place. Jack was displeased, telling him not to call him that, and besides, Valhalla wasn't the only one ranked 1st. Sankcheol closed his eyes and agreed with him, saying that it was true. They both looked at their students, and Jack, with his hands on his waist, happily exclaimed that this year would be different. Sankol turned his head at him, and he added that this time the heroes will definitely achieve the championship. Sankol asked why he was so sure about this. Jack, with a smile on his face, explained that the best of all contractors, the one. And then he asked Sankcheol if he knew who he was talking about. He said he knew, and then he remembered, the green-eyed guy with the yellow aura around him. His nickname was Destroyer, and his first name was Logan. Jack very confidently and with a smile said that his son is studying at their school. Sankol turned to him and asked him again. Jack pointed a finger at the kid in the crowd, saying that he was the one who came as a representative. Logan's son, Logan Jr. He was a brown-haired guy with green eyes, just like his father. Suncheol rubbed his chin, saying that he was then looking forward to seeing what he could do. Jack added that this guy had already signed a contract with his father's co-star. Suncheol was very surprised, still rubbing his chin, and asked what the contract with Allbreaker was. Crossing his arms back, he added questions about whether he was using the same destruction as the other one. Jack said that to some extent, yes, but not as well as his father. Jack then replied with a smirk that even though he had heard that the new students of Valhalla were not to be trifled with, especially that child, Kim Joo-hyuk. Jack lowered one hand and kept the other on his belt, adding that he had heard that he had recently caught a villain red-handed. Sankcheol revealed that Choi Aaron did something similar after that. Jack closed his eyes and bowed his head, saying that they would work well together with Logan Jr., considering that this child could easily outrun many adult contractors. Sankcheol thought for a moment, only saying, "Hem." Jack was surprised, so he turned to look at him and asked him what kind of lackadaisical reaction that was. Sankol stared at the message that appeared in front of him, and on the field they shouted that the participants of the first round were determined. Sankol said slowly that he would understand why he had such a reaction only after watching this match. The message said that Kim Joo-hyuk and Logan Jr. will face off in the first round. Hyuk was standing right in front of Logan, hands in his pockets. Shim, standing at the microphones, said that the rules are the same for all subsequent matches, so he will explain them right now. The rule is extremely simple. The winner is the one who gets the upper hand over his opponent. That is, if someone touches the enemy's vital point with their weapon, the system will not allow them to cause lethal damage with this blow. The drawn rules show a sword strike and victory. Painful sensations are replaced by a shock of electricity, so they can go all out. No one will interfere with them. Shim added that participants should keep in mind that this protection system will remain in effect until the next team match, and as soon as he gives the command, they can start. The countdown started at 3. Hyuk kept his hands in his pockets as he looked at the enemy and wondered why they were using the defense system. Barch said that he should monitor his physical fitness during the first 2 days of the competition in order to be able to properly complete the third task. The report reached 2. Logan looked a little nervous and silent. The report has reached 1, and now they are ready to attack each other. As soon as the word "here we go" was uttered, Hyuk was already flying with his fist right in front of Logan's face. It was lightning fast. Hyuk was surprised by what he saw. It turns out Logan was able to hold off his punch by asking him if he really thought he was strong. There was a yellow aura around him, just like his father's. A distant view of him holding his fist and asking what he thinks is strong. Hyuk stands in front of him while he holds his fist and asks if he is strong. He thinks he still has a long way to go. Logan started swinging his fist, saying that he was more humble than he thought. Logan threw a punch at him, but Hyuk parried it with his hand, sending bright sparks flying. He said to be modest or scratch your tongue, what difference does it make, because he's still growing. Hyuk started twisting his trapped arm as he readied his other hand for a punch. He asked with a snide smile how long he was going to block his punches. Logan started spinning because of this and was very surprised by the force. While Logan was confused, Hyuk was already starting to stab him. It hit him right in the stomach. Logan lost his balance and began to fly far away. After he was able to stop from the momentum, he clutched his stomach, saying that it was a terribly heavy blow. Hyuk pointed his fist at him and said with a smile that he was really tougher than he thought. After all, it seemed to him that one blow would be enough. The teachers watched Logan kneel after the punch. Jack opened his mouth in horror, and Sangshal said that Logan was really strong to be able to withstand Kim Joo-hyuk's punch. Jack opened his eyes wide in surprise and said that he had already seen Kim Joo-hyuk fight in the rating video that was shot for the competition. All their students also watched and reviewed it, but he had never been so formidable. Hyuk stood with his hand in his pocket and his fist outstretched. Jack was surprised to remember that it wasn't over yet, because Logan hadn't taken advantage of the destruction yet. Logan got up from his knees and started using his magic so that he glowed all over with a yellow aura, and then he began to strike with it. Hyuk dodged his punch so that it missed his head, but while the hand was flying, Hyuk's hair was slightly burnt. Hyuk was very surprised to see this. Then I just kicked him in the stomach with all my might, asking him what he was doing anyway. Logan writhed in pain. Hyuk then touched the spot, thinking that he was just smoothing the ends of his hair, and I understood that if it was a normal attack, he would never have hit it. Hyuk was beginning to guess that it was some sort of destructive ability. Logan was thrown back by the impact, leaving footprints on the ground after breaking, and he was holding his stomach and breathing furiously. All he could think was that he had only missed 2 punches to the stomach, but he was already ready to fall to the ground. He stared at his opponent with sweat on his face and thought that if he couldn't deliver a blow of destruction, then there was no point in using it. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and frowned as he remembered that this wasn't the end. He had one more option left. Logan hit the ground with his ability. The ground began to crack under his hands, and then there were cracks all around them. Hyuk, standing and looking at all this in the yellow glow, asked why he was just destroying the floor. Logan lifted his foot, then slammed it into the ground with all his strength, which caused huge chunks of the floor to rise into the air, and he was already moving behind them, thinking that if he could dodge any foreseeable attack, he would make them unpredictable. And standing behind Hyuk, between the flying rocks, he once again began to prepare his destruction magic in his hand. But Hyuk noticed him immediately, so he started looking back. Logan was startled, and it was clear from his face that he didn't understand how Hyuk could have found him among the piles of rocks. But he decided it was too late, so I started hitting the floor with my hand. But suddenly a rock hits him in the face, which is very confusing for him. All the rocks fell to the floor, and Logan rubbed his face in pain. Hyuk said that he was hiding behind the stove, but doesn't he realize how much his own magic gives him away? And right after that, he swung his fist right at him until he just took his hands away from his face. Then a fist hits him hard in the face. Logan went flying into the wall, and crashing into it, there was a huge wind current behind. Logan was sitting on the ground with his head down, and Hyuk was standing right in front of him with his fist outstretched. Shim shouted that it looks like the round has come to an end and the winner is Hyuk from Valhalla Academy. Jack was in utter shock beyond words, and Sankal said that was why he didn't react sentimentally. Hyuk walked through the broken arena calmly. Sankal thinks that this child is just a monster. The next round was Lee Hwi and Hyuk's fight, where he destroyed him with a single uppercut. In another round, Lee Bella versus Hyuk. He destroyed it, too, with a single, direct blow to the face. The girl with pink hair just flew away from this. And finally, an individual match, the final battle. Kim Joo-hyuk versus Choi Aaron. They were facing each other, and Choi was holding onto her katana. And then, looking at him with loving eyes, she said that they both made it to the final, but they were both from Valhalla. It seems that the victory of their academy is still guaranteed. Hyuk silently scratched his head after finding out that there was no reason to hold this final match other than to determine a place in the rankings. The sun was bright in the sky, and Hyuk was standing in front of Choi with his eyes closed. Choi added that the winner will get a scholarship, so she said that she doesn't need it, so maybe she should give up. Hyuk, looking at her confidently, said that he didn't care who won as long as she didn't give up. Since they had already entered the stadium, it would be remiss of them to deprive the audience of bread and circuses. Then he pointed at her and said that she should also show him her progress. Hyuk began to stretch her shoulder, telling her to give it her all, and he'll take her injuries into account. Choi was highly motivated, so she took up a stance, preparing to hit him with her katana. While taking out the katana, there were many lightning bolts around it. Hyuk also started swinging his fist at her with a smile. Everything around him was purple. Suddenly, Shim was in shock, eyes wide, and Jack was holding his head in shock, too. Sankal was also very surprised. Senyuk and Soyeon were sweating in surprise. Soyeon was already biting her nails, and Hyuk was able to knock her face down with just one punch. Her sword was just lying there. Shim shouted that the result was obvious. The winner of this year's interscholastic individual combat competition is announced as Kim Joo-hyuk. Hyuk was looking at her with a very surprised face and an outstretched fist. Even he was shocked, and Barch said that it was very ruthless, and besides, didn't he say that he would take her injuries into account? Hyuk asked if he didn't hold back, didn't even try to punch him in the stomach. He added that it was an accident to lay her down in this way. Choi just lay face down on the ground in silence, not even moving. Hayek remembered hitting the sword, telling Barcha that the trajectory of her blade suddenly changed and the sword was aimed at his stomach, so he punched it. Looking at his hands with a smile, he thought that he definitely became stronger. He can't believe that his mana pool has increased. Now it can actually hold a certain amount of it. And he looked down at Choi, who was still lying motionless. He said that this girl also became stronger. That same evening, only a small auditorium was lit from all over the complex. Sankal, holding the book in his hand, said that they were all doing great. All the kids were sitting together again, and Sungcheol asked if they were all right. They agreed once. Sankal looked at them and noticed that thanks to the protection system, they were not injured, but they should still visit the infirmary. After he said that he would tell them something about tomorrow's stage, Hayek raised his head and decided to listen to him. There was fire in his eyes and he was thinking that this was a waste of time. Would he really have to wait another day before he could see the eye of the great forest? Sangcheol started walking out of the classroom, saying that they would finish up for the day and get some rest. As he turned the corner, Sangcheol glanced back as someone called out to him. It was Hayek, who was right behind him. Lee turned to Kim's side and asked what he needed. Kim looked at him with a smile and said that he wanted to talk about tomorrow's team battle. He asked if he could finish earlier, if he could start the next test right away. Lee looked at him and asked the eye of the great forest. Lee opened the book and said that this had never happened before, so he would have to look at his list of rules. He started reading the rules and said there were 2 of them. Only 1 test was allowed every day, but there was an exception. He said that if the tests ended quickly, the student could move on to the next test at the discretion of his teacher, and if the test menu was not ready or the student was in an unsuitable state, then he was given time to prepare for the test. Kim looked at him with a smile and said what it said was up to him. He asked something thought about it. Lee looked at him and asked if he could move on to the next test. Lee said that if he finished it early and came to the staff room, he would let him start the next test. Kim closed his eyes and nodded. He said that he understood everything and said that he would see you tomorrow. He turned around and walked back with his hands in his pockets and a smile on his face. Lee bade him good night. As Kim walked down the corridor, Barch asked if he planned to complete the Eye of the Great Forest trials tomorrow. Kim looked ahead and said that he was well aware of this test in advance, so he planned to do so. Ambarkik pondered and said that he understood everything. Boris said Kim wanted to attract the attention of students from other academies. Kim got angry and asked if he was an idiot, then asked what he was saying. Barch said it was a misunderstanding. Kim closed his eyes and said that in any case, he should finish this ordeal as soon as possible. After that, he confidently looked ahead. After that, we see the next day the arena for fighting in Valhalla. The man was standing and using a microphone to greet the audience. Ligon and Lai were standing in the back, holding tablets in their hands. The man said that now explain Rule 2 of the test. The audience was standing, and on top of it was a huge system screen on which a man was entered. He said that they would be holding a team competition here today. 5 representatives from each academy will fight together. The man said that the tests will take place in a mountainous area, so viewers will watch it through holographic screens that will be captured by drones on camera. After we see the students and the top flying drone filmed, Soyeon looked ahead and asked when Kim would be coming, because the competition was about to start soon. Kim walked up to the group and apologized for being late. Soyeon looked at him with displeasure and asked why he was here so late. Kim said with a smile on his face that he had overslept. Soyeon stood there and said that he was supposed to arrive 30 minutes early. She asked if he hadn't listened to the teacher. Kim stood there and said that he was probably thinking about something else at the time. He raised his hand to his head and told her not to make any noise because he would take care of everything. Soyeon stood in front of him and asked him what he meant by that. She asked if he understood what he was saying because it was a team test. Kim said he knew all about it. Soyeon pointed her finger at him and said that because he had defeated the other players, they would all be targeted by them, so she asked if he wanted to go as well. She looked at the other students and asked them if they agreed, but they looked around and just didn't say anything. After that, Aaron came up to them and apologized for distracting them. Soyeon immediately asked her if she agreed with her. Aaron asked if she could go with Kim. Kim looked at her and told her to just stay here. She said she would. Soyeon didn't understand why she was so calm. Kim looked at her and told her to stop tweeting and save her energy for the exam. Soyeon asked what you meant by tweeting. After which, the man announced that the battle would start in a few seconds. Kim started to stretch his arms and said that he would have one more test at 2 p.m. The countdown started. Soyeon looked at him and asked what he was talking about. Kim turned away from the students and walked forward. Soyeon called out to Kim, but he said that she was very noisy. He confidently looked ahead and said that he had to prepare for the Eye of the Great Forest. Then the man announced the start. We see the White Lotus team. They looked to the side and noticed Kim, who said he had found it. The girls immediately took up their weapons and started shouting. They realized that it was that guy from Valhalla. The red-haired girl told everyone to get ready. Kim looked at them with a smile and swung his sword. He said that the girl reacted much faster than he expected. Then a system message appeared on the holographic screen. It said that the White Lotus was destroyed. Logan stood there and didn't understand what was going on. He was very surprised when he found out that the White Lotus had been destroyed, but only 10 minutes had passed since the start of the battle. He looked ahead and realized that this fool from Valhalla was heading straight for the White Lotus. He thought he would find them earlier, but things are different. The guy started concentrating his hands and said he could feel mine in that direction. Logan asked if they were Valhalla's students. The guy said that it was one person. Logan was shocked by this. Logan pointed to the side and told Luke to hold the magic shield with Dan. They stood in front of them and began to concentrate the shield and make it out with their own hands. The girl sat down on the ground and began to form a sorrow. Logan told her to prepare a magic circle. Then, he told Libella Poe to prepare the shield. She started to take out her shield, which lit up with a bright green light. She said she'd done it before. Logan stood and was surrounded by a protective shield. He spread his hands out to the sides and they began to glow with a bright light. The girl looked at him and said that it was only one person. Did they really need such protection? Logan looked ahead and said that if it really was like this, then they needed that kind of protection. Bella looked ahead and said that Melissa didn't know that because she hadn't fought him. Bella said that Kim was incredibly strong. Melissa looked in Logan's direction and said it was Silenus, too. He told her not to even think about comparing him to him. The guy who formed the shield with Mom's help said that the magic just disappeared. Logan asked if he'd left. The girl said that it might have been true, but he had returned after defeating the White Lotus Academy. They stood in the middle of the forest and prepared a full defense. At that moment, Kim was watching them from above. Logan sensed something was wrong, but then he looked up and realized that Kim was on top of him. At that moment, a sword hit him in the face. Kim hit him right in the face with his ki, and he fell to the ground. The girls turned around and asked what the hell it was. Kim looked at her and stabbed her in the stomach. He said it was too slow. Melissa started to gather the energy in her hands and called out to Kim. A bright red bolt missed him as he dodged, and Kim asked what it was. Then he hit Melissa, sending her flying backwards. He asked her if she really thought she could hit him with a bunch of magic. At that moment, two guys were swinging from behind to remove him, but at that moment, Kim slammed his sword into the body of one of the guys. The impact was so strong that it grazed two of them at once and they lost consciousness. Kim became and looked at the students he had defeated, who were lying on the ground unconscious. After that, we see a system message where it was written that the heroes were destroyed. Kim looked at this message with a smile and said that now he can go to the Eye of the Great Forest. Afterward, we are transported to Valhalla's observation room and see Shim turn around and ask how it all happened. People were standing with tablets and listening to him. Shim said that Kim completed the team fight in 23 minutes. To be precise, he spent only 20 minutes on the road and spent only 3 minutes on fights. Shim put her hand under her chin and said it would ruin their schedule, and that was a problem. Lee, holding the tablet in his hand, said that from what he calculated in the rules, if the trials ended before noon, then they could start the next trial right away. Shin listened to what Lee said. Lee also said that if he didn't mind, he would like to discuss it with other academies. Shin held out his hand and said that they would tell him how to end the discussion. Lee stood there thinking about Kim. Lee recalled Kim asking him about it. He wondered and asked Kim about it because he knew it was going to happen. Lee found this intimidating. Then we see Lee walking down the hall with Jack. Jack put his hand on Lee's shoulder and said that he still needed to talk to White Lotus. Jack said the heroes didn't mind starting the next challenge. Jack looked at him and said that he was finally convinced of this when he looked at the battle. Jack said he didn't think the outcome would have changed if they had postponed it. Lee listened to what he said, and Jack said that he now understood why he called Kim monsters. Lee closed his eyes and said with a smile that he understood. They went ahead and Lee offered to talk to White Lotus. Afterward, we see the students in Valhalla's recreation room relaxing and going about their business. Soyeon was wiping her sword and looked away in silence. She looked at Kim, who was sitting down and resting, and thought that he was a madman. Soyeon didn't expect him to finish the battle alone. She just stood there and looked ahead. She recalled that she was going to take the initiative since their teacher told her to be the team leader, but she couldn't do anything back then. She remembered Eren and realized that she had lost to her in individual matches. Soyeon had heard that she was being trained, so she wondered if it was because of that. Soyeon put her hand to her chest and said that at this rate, she would definitely keep falling behind everyone else and she couldn't just let that happen. She looked at Kim, who was resting, and wondered if giving up her pride would teach her how to fight better. Then the contestants were called out and Kim opened his eyes. Soyeon looked to the side and the announcement said that tomorrow's Eye of the Great Forest test will be held today at 13:00. They asked to prepare the students for the next test. Kim sat with Eren and smiled. He thought about it and realized that it had happened exactly as I had told Kim. Then he opened his eyes and told me to wait. He said that before they started the next test, he would tell them something in advance. He looked at the students and said that in the Eye of the Great Forest, he would act alone. He said that everyone should survive on their own. Soyeon stood there and listened to everything he said. Kim said that if they had any problems, they could call him. Soyeon started to think and realized that he was going to go it alone again. She served her hands in front of her and realized that they had already won the last 2 challenges, and if they didn't get the lowest score, they would lose. She looked ahead and realized that even if this survival was in the maze, there shouldn't be many monsters. Kim looked to the side questioningly and looked at Soyeon, who was standing in front of him. Kim asked her if she had anything to say and called her Birdie. Sooyoung asked why Bird, and then asked him in frustration why he kept coming up with a nickname for her. Kim looked at her and said that she just proved his words. Aaron sat back in silence and said that Birdie was a cute nickname. After that, we are transported to the eye of the great forest, and we see how many students and guards were standing in front of the doors. This was the labyrinth gate. Shin presented them with a microphone and said that they were starting the final challenge, which was survival in the maze. The holographic screen was watched by students and other spectators, and Shin said that, as in the last test, the audience will watch through holographic screens. He looked ahead and said that before he started testing, he would tell them something about the maze. He said that there was a more specific task and evaluation criteria. The eye of the great forest where the trial takes place was a maze-shaped forest, as its name suggests. Shin said that the maze inside was not like any other. There were unique environments where the rain never stopped, and there was a lot of vegetation that completely filled the entire maze. In addition, the monster is quite low level, so there are few factors that pose a threat. Shin said that the rain and thick bushes were the real true threat to the student's survival. Shin held up a finger and said that the test was how well the student was able to survive and adapt to the living conditions. He said that when the students enter this maze, they will measure their condition and in 5 hours they will check it. Shin said that the closer a person is to their original condition, which was measured at the start, the higher their score will be when concluding the result. The students stood and listened intently to everything he said, and Kim yawned. Shin said that fights between teams were prohibited. After that, he looked ahead and said that the test had begun. After that, the maze doors opened and the teams went inside. After that, we are transported to an abandoned warehouse in Valhalla and see Al and Lisa. They looked to the side, and someone told him that the students had entered the eye of the great forest. A masked girl entered the warehouse. It was Il Shin-ya, the head of the Samsul Alliance. Her pseudonym was Alia. Alia said it was time for them to leave. She put her hands on her shoulders and said that some magic was blocking the entrance to the maze. She said that she was supported by 2 people. They looked ahead with a smile, and the fox said that then they would deal with them first. After that, a bright purple light rang out and they broke up into pieces. Lee was shocked by what he saw. They were looking at screens that had stopped working. They were shocked to fill out that they were all malfunctioning. Shin looked ahead and asked what was going on. He said that the simultaneous failure of all the cameras seemed very suspicious. Shin looked at the guard and contacted the gate guard. Security guard, I called on the phone and said that no one answered. He turned to the other people and Lai said something that the students might have encountered trouble that might have happened there. He suggested that they go to the maze themselves. Shin approved, and then they all went into the maze. They came and stood before him. Lee was shocked by what he saw. He looked and saw how everything in front of the gate had collapsed and stones were lying on the bodies of people. They didn't understand what had happened here at all. After that, we see a maze. The students stood in the rain and looked ahead. Someone called out to Logan. The girl said that Bella wasn't feeling very well. She was trembling and very pale. Bella was soaking wet and said she was fine, it was just that the rain was too sudden and cold for her. Logan held a hand over his head and said that if she got hypothermia, she would be excluded from this test. He said that even if they couldn't win, he wanted them all to get high scores here. He stood in front of her and held out his hand. He suggested building a hut to hide from the rain. He told Melissa to gather the big leaves, and Dan and Luke would have to gather the branches. The students said that they understood everything and went. Logan rolled up his sleeves and said that he would level the ground and dig a hole for both huts. Logan then looked ahead and didn't expect to see a dark purple sphere in front of him. People from the warehouse came out, and they didn't understand why it was raining here. They put their hands under their heads and the fox told them to forget about the rain because they had to finish their mission. The fox's gaze changed to that of a killer. He said something about killing Kim. He stood in front of Logan and held a knife in his hand. He realized that this wasn't their goal. He called out to Alia with displeasure and said that it was Neckham. She said it teleported them to a source of moderately strong magic because that was the only way she could find it. Al asked what it meant to be moderate. Logan looked ahead and asked who these people were. He heard that they wanted to kill Kim. He thought about it and realized that, in addition, he sensed black magic and maybe these people were the real villains who were standing in front of them just now, and the fox was smiling extremely maliciously while holding a knife in his hand. What Al said was that they can't leave any witnesses, so they need to be dealt with. She assigned the case to the fox. He said that everyone knew and went ahead. Logan said something about them being fools and started gathering energy in his hand. He accumulated a sphere of bright magic and asked what the hell they were doing here. After that, he went to him waving his hand. The fox stood in front of him holding a knife and stabbed him. It immediately appeared behind him and pierced right through him. The fox asked if he had really just called him a fool. The fox ran him through. Logan looked back in shock and asked how the man had gotten behind him. Lessa looked at him and said with a smile that he didn't even understand the hike. He told him to look ahead of him. Logan looked ahead as a fox was standing in front of him, and behind him was an exact replica of him that had impaled him. Logan looked ahead and was shocked when he saw two identical people standing in front of him. The fox said something right there, then swung to stab him again. Lessa once again stabbed him in the body, and he said it was called a doppelganger. Logan started coughing and then fell on his face to the ground. Al looked ahead and asked if he had killed him. Logan said what he wanted, he let it slowly expire. Afterward, they were surprised when someone started shouting. They stared ahead, and the girl called Logan's name with her shield. Al looked at the fox and told him to get rid of any unnecessary witnesses. Lessa looked ahead and said with a smile that he knew about all this and would take care of her. Al went and the fox asked her if he could do whatever he wanted. Al told me to do what I wanted as long as I finished it quickly. The fox said it was just fine. Then with a maniacal smile, he rushed forward with the knife to the girl. The girl was shocked when she saw this. After that, we are transported and apparently he was running through the forest. He was lost in thought and didn't know where he was. System message sent him this message. Eye of the Great Forest of Valhalla, home of Maid Guy Rona, warning, to complete the task clearly, he needed a sword whose name was obscene. Kim was thinking about Maid Guy Rona's house. He looked ahead and wondered if there was a house in this place at all. He said that there were only bushes with trees that got in your eyes. He was running by and noticed a girl. He stopped, and the girl quietly said no, then shouted loudly when she saw that all her comrades were killed and they were lying on the ground bleeding. Al held her hand to her head and told her to find one more witness. Fox said it was starting to annoy him. He asked where they all came from. Afterward, he was surprised when he realized that this witness was Kim, who approached the girl. They watched with a smile and realized that the goal itself had come to them. Fox said that he thought that he came running to the screams that the students were making. The fox said that's why he doesn't kill his victims right away. Kim looked at them and realized that they thought he was the target. He looked down and saw many students who were covered in cuts and blood. He looked ahead and told the blonde to help the wounded while he dealt with the enemies. He looked at the students who were lying on the ground and said that they were still alive. He looked ahead and said that at first glance it looked like they were deliberately stabbed so that they wouldn't die instantly, but he didn't understand why they were left to bleed to death. He looked at them ahead and realized that they were just wild dogs that bullied people. He looked ahead and said that they didn't spoil his mood. He said that since they were infiltrated here, he should get rid of them immediately. The fox stood in front of him and asked him what he meant by that. He looked at him with a smile and said that a brat like him didn't fully understand what situation he was in. The fox said that he was stuck in this maze with them, and they broke in here through the only entrance to the maze, and they turned off the surveillance drones so no one would see or be able to help him. The fox looked at him with a smile and said that even if the teachers noticed, they wouldn't be able to get here quickly, and the entrance was completely destroyed here. It was completely littered with rocks that grazed the guards. I said it would take them at least an hour to sort it out and get in. Kim looked ahead and said 1 hour, then repeated another 1 hour. He looked up and said that in this fucking forest under the incessant rain, the fox wanted to say that he had an hour to find this place. Lessa looked at him and held up the knife. He said he didn't know what he was talking about. The fox said that he was talking nonsense and then began to swing at Kim, who kept his hands in his pockets and told him to die. He threw a punch and thought he had stuck it in Kim, but there was no one in Kim's place, and the blow landed on the ground. Lessa looked at him in surprise and didn't understand where Kim had gone. They looked up the slope together and saw Kim. He said it was a stupid situation, so he pointed his sword at one of the villains and said he would kill them. He landed a punch directly on the face of one of the villains and threw it as far away as possible. Al and Alia were watching. The fox fell to the floor. Al and Alia looked in his direction. Kim jumped up and was about to swing. He swung and stabbed the girls. They lost consciousness and fell together to the fox. Kim looked ahead and called out to the girl. He called her blonde and told her to use all her magic to patch up the wounded people who were lying and bleeding on the ground. He said that if she couldn't cope, then she should run to the west because there are Valhalla students there. The girl was surprised after she sat down and began to concentrate magic in her hands and treat the wounded. She said that she would try to do everything in her power. The fox started to get up and groaning in pain. He brought his hand to his head. He looked to the side and didn't understand why the girls were also lying on the ground. How did the fox stand in front of the surprised one and say that it was great? He said that his companions were quite weak. Lessa immediately sat up and took Multiply out of his hands. Kim looked at him and said that before he killed him, he asked to be allowed to ask. I reminded him that he had called him a target. He asked who the customers were. Lessa looked at him with a serious face and asked if Kim really thought he would tell him about this. Afterward, he reminded him that he wasn't exactly a rookie, so he held his head and said that it was strange, because usually people immediately say who sent them. Lessa looked at him with displeasure and realized that the situation was lousy. He realized that he was confused for a second, but he would suddenly attack him with his doppelganger. At this moment, a doppelganger that was emitting a dark blue aura appeared in front of Kim. He swings the knife to stab him. He threw a punch, but Kim easily moved out of the way, and the doppelganger clearly didn't expect him to be able to dodge. Lessa looked at him in shock and didn't understand how he was able to do this, and he was attacking him with his double and whose presence was impossible to detect. Kim looked at him while holding his weapon and said that he was acting like a rat that only attacks from the back. He swung his sword and asked if he wanted to attack suddenly. The fox looked at him while holding the knife in his hand, after which a blow immediately flew into his face. He immediately held his nose and looked at Kim, who had hit him with his hand. He holds up his nose and Kim calls him bald. Kim stood in front of him and said that he would ask him one last time. He asked again who his clients were. The fox called him a brat, then asked him really, and he still thought that he would tell who his client was. Kim realized that he didn't have any useful information from him, so he swung it with a maniacal smile and said that if he did, he would beat him to death. After that, a strong blow was heard, from which he flew to the side and caused colossal destruction. After Lai and the other people had a happy journey, they immediately hurried inside the maze. When they reached their goal, they saw how students were helping other students. They stood and watched it all. Jack ran over to the battered Logan and asked if he was all right. Logan immediately called out to the teachers and said that it was a little difficult for him to move around, but that wasn't the biggest problem. Lee looked and listened to everything they said. Jack said something that was a real relief. Lee looked at them again and asked what had happened here. Logan said that he was attacked by unknown people who suddenly appeared here. He said that there was one man and 2 women among them. Lee looked at him carefully and said that there were 3 of them. He asked Logan if they could be from the Samsel Alliance, then he asked where the attackers were now. Logan pointed to the side, and Lee and the teachers looked over. Logan said they were there and there were several bodies lying in the rubble where he pointed. Al and the fox were both unconscious. Lee watched in shock as Logan said something about Kim beating everyone else. Lee started to think in shock and realized that Kim was incredibly strong. He looked at them and saw that all around them, the landscape of the forest was completely destroyed. Logan looked up and said what he saw as he fought these people until he passed out. While Logan was telling all this, he was being treated and supported. Logan said that Kim was really incredible. He recalled how he struck the enemy and said that he easily completely destroyed the enemies, and they could not even touch him with a finger. Logan looked at them and said that when he was fighting them, I didn't see half of his strength. Next to him, the girl who treated him was just silent. Logan closed his eyes and said with a smile that he thought he would be the strongest among all the participants, but everything turned out to be completely different and apparently his arrogance got the better of him and everything went wrong. Jack looked at him seriously and told him not to worry because Kim was just an anomaly. Lee looked at Logan and reminded him that he said there were 3 attackers. He asked where the other one was. The girl said that Kim dealt with her. At the same time, the girl's body fell right in front of them. The teachers turned to the side and saw her body. They knew she was here. Kim dropped her and said that he was trying to find out who was behind all this and what their purpose in attacking the maze was. Lee looked at him and realized he was fine, and Kimmy looked at him and said he was fine. Lee closed his eyes and said with a smile that it was good. He suggested that they discuss it in more detail when they returned to the academy. Kim looked at him and agreed with him. He said that teachers would help the injured students and bring them to the hospital, and Valhalla students should find White Lotus and tell them about the situation. Aaron, along with other students, deprived others of her listening information. We can see the sky of the maze where it was raining and the teacher said that the competition was over. After that, we are transferred to the visible dorm of the basement. It was already night outside and I came out of the bathroom wiping my hair. He lay down on the bed with his arms thrown back and said that today was quite a difficult day and he was very tired. He closed his eyes and Barch told him that Kim had used a lot of mana to deal with them. Kim said that he completely agreed with this because he really used a lot. He opened his eyes with a smile and said that everything went well. After that, a system message appeared in front of him where it was said that the Eye of the Great Forest of Valhalla, home of Maid Guy Rona, attention, you need a sword to complete the task clearly. Climb 1 from Maid Guy's house, task completed. Kim reached into his pocket and pulled out a blue sphere. He said it was hard enough, but he was able to do it. He recalled how he defeated the girl who was lying on the ground. Alia was lying on the ground, shaking with fear. She said her head hurt a lot. Then Kim came up to her and told him to get up. She stood up and saw Kim, who was wearing a suit. King sat down next to her and asked her what her abilities were. The girl did not understand what kind of open it was. Kim asked where they were bullying from, and she was probably from the Samsel squad. The girl lay on the ground and listened to everything he said. Kim said that there were 2 fighters present and the person who supported them asked Kim correctly. Alia listened in surprise. Kim looked at her and guessed that she must have been the support. The girl looked at him and Kim asked again what her abilities were, then told her to answer. The girl stood up, holding his hand, and told him to forget about it because she wasn't going to tell him anything. Spaces began to form around her, but Kim stepped up and held out his hand. He looked at her, and Alia was shocked that he had managed to stop her. She thought about it and didn't understand how it had happened. Kim looked at her and said that he understood everything. Her ability was to create space and move in it. Kim asked if he was right about her ability. Alia stood looking at him. Kim put his hand on her shoulder and said it was just fine. He said she had to help him. He started smiling maniacally and said that if she helped, nothing would happen to her, Kim said. He lay on the bed and recalled the whole situation. He thought about how it was thanks to her abilities that he was able to obtain this sphere that held itself in check. Borscht folded his hands and said that he had not kept his promise. He reminded that he promised the girl that if she helps him in one case, he will not tell anyone about her and will not turn her in. Borscht asked why he still decided to knock her out. He looked away and said it was because she never answered his question when he asked about who hired them. Kim said that if she had answered that question, nothing would have happened and he would have let her go. Borscht looked ahead and said he was surprised by this. To them lay on the bed and said that now that they find out that one of the Samsala Alliance was their client. Kim thought about it and said that Rockdeal was a fool. He closed his eyes and said that he had to get as much information as possible to act much faster, but if there was a Rockdeal family starting to hinder him, then should he destroy them all to act as he wanted? He looked at the sphere again and said that whatever it was, he was able to get it, and it would be much easier from there. After that, a system message appeared that said take the sphere from Maid Guy Rona's house in Valhalla. Task completed, and then the text was censored. After that, a new system message appeared, which read meet in a dream with lost memories, and then there was also a censored text. Kim looked at the light and didn't understand what the hell it said. He was surprised that he just really needed to get some sleep. Borscht said it really felt like this. Borscht looked at the message and said that if he managed to find his memories, then maybe his memories were also returned because he also received such a notification. Kim asked seriously, then went to the light switch and said he should have tried it. He put the sphere down next to him and lay down on the bed. He reflected on his lost memories, then said that he didn't think he'd ever lost any of his memories. Then he closed his eyes and realized that it didn't matter because maybe he could actually do something about it. After that, we see the tower that he met in a previous life. He remembers the moment when he was wounded enough to lie in the tower when it began to collapse. He said it was just a terrible situation, and then he sat and watched the rocks fall. After one of them fell directly on his head. He remembers this moment, and at the moment when the stone was supposed to fall, time stops abruptly on his head and the stone began to rise back. Kim looked up and saw an unknown dark body standing in front of him, looking directly at him. She was completely faceless. It said well that he would take care of his time and the names he protected in this world. The unknown shape began to shine with bright hues, and after saying so, it disappeared and time began to pass again. Tim abruptly opens his eyes and wakes up. He gets out of bed and doesn't know what the hell happened. Kim didn't understand and wondered what kind of dream it was. Kim clutched his head and wondered if this was really happening to him. He didn't know if it was really the memories he had lost. Borscht watched it all and Kim asked if she remembered something. Borscht said he was a tiger. Kim looked and asked what he was saying.